Chapter 1681. Luan Luan inadvertently touched the necklace on Xiao Chen's neck. This necklace was personally refined by Luo Li. It contained the remnant souls of Qin Shiru, Xiao Qing, Bai Ruyue, and the others. Xiao Chen had always worn this necklace close to his body. However, after such a long time, this necklace did not have the slightest movement. But this time, when Luan Luan touched the necklace immediately emitted a faint, gentle white light. Moreover, following the appearance of this white light, Xiao Chen also felt that the spiritual energy in the necklace seemed to have become stronger. At first, Xiao Chen did not believe it. However, after sensing it several times, he finally confirmed that after Luan Luan touched the necklace, everyone's remnant souls seemed to have been restored. Although it was not much, it was indeed stronger than before. Could it be that Luan Luan could heal everyone's remnant souls? With this thought in mind, Luan Luan looked like a child who had done something wrong when she saw Xiao Chen fall silent. She said with some grievance, "Father, what's wrong? Did Luan Luan do something wrong?" Xiao Chen suddenly froze on the spot, giving Luan Luan a fright. The little girl thought that she had done something wrong to make Xiao Chen unhappy. Hearing Luan Luan's words, Xiao Chen regained his senses. Looking at the nervous Luan Luan, Xiao Chen gently patted the little girl's head and said with a smile, "No." Luan Luan really cared about Xiao Chen. As long as Xiao Chen's emotions fluctuated a little, the little girl would be affected. Xiao Chen was also somewhat helpless about this. However, Xiao Chen did not dwell on this problem. What Xiao Chen was most concerned about was whether Luan Luan had the ability to restore remnant souls. Generally speaking, if a cultivator's soul was damaged, it was basically impossible to restore it. Moreover, with the passage of time, these remnant souls would quickly dissipate between heaven and earth. It was also because Luo Li had personally refined this necklace that everyone's remnant souls were hidden in it. Otherwise, after such a long time, everyone's remnant souls would have dissipated into nothingness long ago. However, although the necklace refined by Luo Li could ensure that everyone's remnant souls would not be destroyed, it did not have the slightest recovery effect. Therefore, everyone's remnant souls had not changed in the slightest all this time. But now, it seemed that Luan Luan had the ability to restore them. He was extremely excited. After all, reviving his family was his only wish and his greatest wish. As well as Xiao Chen was willing to do anything and was willing to pay any price to pay. Hesitantly, he took off the necklace and placed it in Luan Luan's hand. However, this time, the white light did not appear. Luan Luan, and he thought. Although he was disappointed, Xiao Chen did not give up. He sensed the changes in everyone's remnant souls in the necklace. Xiao Chen almost jumped up when he sensed it. Everyone's remnant souls were indeed recovering. Although it was not as fast as before, they were indeed recovering. They were recovering very slowly, and all of this was due to Luan Luan's efforts. Luan Luan's identity was still unknown, but it was undeniable that Luan Luan had the ability to restore remnant souls. Xiao Chen was overjoyed. He immediately hung the necklace around Luan Luan's neck. Since Luan Luan had the ability to restore remnant souls, this necklace was obviously much better with Luan Luan than with him. Although he did not know how long it would take for everyone's remnant souls to recover, as long as they were recovering, there was hope. Luan Luan did not understand why Xiao Chen suddenly hung the necklace around her neck. Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Luan Luan, this necklace is very important to Father. Those who live in it are Father's relatives, so you must take good care of it. Don't let it be damaged." Father's relatives? But why do they live in the necklace? Luan Luan asked in confusion. Since she did not understand Xiao Chen's meaning, Xiao Chen could only use the simplest words to explain it to Luan Luan. Because they have all suffered heavy injuries, so they need to recuperate in the necklace. Luan Luan can heal their injuries, so Father is giving this necklace to you. However, Luan Luan must be careful. Don't lose it or let it be damaged, understand? Xiao Chen gently exhorted. Luan Luan nodded heavily and said, "Yes, Luan Luan will definitely be careful." Luan Luan might not understand Xiao Chen's meaning, but Luan knew that this necklace was very important to father, so she must protect it well. Hearing Luan's answer, Xiaochen smiled and patted her head. Yes, Luan is such a good girl. Alright, Daddy still needs to cultivate for a while. You can play by yourself. Daddy will take you to wash up and change into new clothes later, okay? Okay. Hearing that Xiaochen needed to cultivate, Luan nodded obediently. Then, she really did not disturb Xiaochen and went to study the necklace by herself. In Luan's opinion, this necklace was the first thing her father had given her. Moreover, it was very important to her father, so Luan also attached great importance to this necklace. Sitting not far from Xiaochen, Luan looked at the necklace on her neck and said in a childish voice, Daddy said that all of you are family and that all of you have suffered serious injuries. But don't worry, Luan will definitely protect all of you. But all of you have to recover quickly so that Daddy will be happy. Luan obviously did not know that she could recover the strength of her remnant soul. The little girl only knew that this necklace was very, very important, and that she must protect it well. Luan's ability was indeed a pleasant surprise for Xiaochen. Moreover, with Luan, Xiaochen's hopes of reviving his family had increased. At the very least, with Luan, everyone's remnant soul could be continuously restored. Regardless of whether the process was fast or slow, Xiaochen believed that one day, he would be able to revive his family. Of course, Xiaochen doted on Luan even more in his heart. Thinking about it, he felt that it was not bad to have such a daughter. She was obedient, lovable, and had even helped him a lot. Feeling very happy, Xiaochen immediately began to consolidate his cultivation base. 3 days passed in a row. Xiaochen finally completely stabilized his cultivation base. He slowly opened his eyes and saw Luan sleeping soundly beside him. Needless to say, this little girl definitely did not cultivate during these 3 days. Without anyone watching over her, this little girl was lazy and had no interest in cultivating at all. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1682. Xiaochen shook his head and let out a bitter smile as he watched Luan snoring away. This little girl's talent was definitely top-notch. Or perhaps, it could be said that this little girl's talent could no longer be described as talent. When she cultivated, it was as simple as eating and drinking for her. However, Luan seemed to be really resistant to cultivation. As long as Xiaochen wasn't supervising her, Luan would definitely slack off whenever she could. Luan was still filthy from head to toe, but perhaps due to Xiaochen's presence, the little girl seemed to be having a good dream as the corners of her mouth were always hanging with a sweet smile. She was adorable and lovable. Putting everything else aside, Xiaochen really liked Luan. Besides, after spending the past few days with Luan, Xiaochen had gradually gotten used to his identity as a father. Xiaochen carried Luan gently and called out with a smile. Little lazy pig, wake up. Don't sleep anymore. Upon hearing Xiaochen's call, Luan slowly opened her eyes and looked at Xiaochen sleepily. Then, she called out sweetly. Daddy. You definitely haven't been cultivating these past few days, right? Upon hearing Luan's words, Xiaochen purposely asked with a straight face. Upon hearing his words, Luan was taken aback. She revealed an awkward expression as though she had been seen through. But shortly after, Luan came up with a countermeasure. She hugged Xiaochen and immediately displayed her coquettishness. Daddy, hug, hug. In the face of Luan's coquettishness, Xiaochen was naturally defeated again. He couldn't bear to see Luan slacking off and not cultivating anymore. His cultivation base had successfully broken through and stabilized, so this time's seclusion was considered over. Shortly after, Xiaochen carried Luan out of the stone room. At the same time, many of the other 2 world supreme talents in the Thousand Hells sect had also ended their cultivation. As soon as he left the stone room, Xiaochen saw Yu Shujin and the others chatting idly. They had come out of seclusion earlier than Xiaochen, and all of their cultivations had increased. It could be said that the annihilation of the 10,000 prisons sect had brought great benefits to everyone. Seeing Xiaochen and Luan, Yu Shujin and the others all stood up and bowed respectfully. Heirs. Xiaochen didn't care about what everyone was thinking. He just nodded slightly. After casually chatting with Yu Shujin and the others, Xiaochen inquired about Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu's situation. He learned that the two of them had yet to come out of seclusion, but he wasn't in a hurry. He brought Luan with him to wash up. The little girl was filthy. Xiaochen took Luan with a change of clothes and found a cave residence. He then began to bathe Luan. To be honest, as a father, it was the first time Xiaochen had personally bathed his daughter. However, many things were innate, so Xiaochen quickly entered the role of a father. Luan also enjoyed Xiaochen's service. He carefully dressed Luan and changed her into a new set of clothes. At this moment, Luan looked like a completely different person from before. Her facial features were so exquisite that they were almost flawless, as well as her chubby cheeks and small hands. Anyone who saw her would probably like her. She was just like a doll. She looked like a completely different person. Looking at the freshly washed Luan, Xiaochen couldn't help but sigh. There was actually such a cute child in this world. Luan still wanted to be carried by Xiaochen even though she was wearing new clothes. Xiaochen had no choice but to follow Luan's wishes and carry her out of the cave residence. When they saw the freshly washed Luan again, Yu Shujin and the others were stunned. They couldn't help but think, what an adorable child. Everyone knew that Luan was Xiaochen's daughter, but Yu Shujin and the others didn't pay much attention to it. But now, looking at such an adorable Luan, they felt as if Xiaochen had found a treasure. Xiaochen ignored everyone's shock and carried Luan to the courtyard. Xiaochen said indifferently. Did the first mainland react? Yes, they should have asked for help from the 7th wilderness. Also, they have arranged many spies around the 10,000 Hells sect, Yu Shujin replied. After going into seclusion, Xiaochen was naturally most concerned about the movements of the other forces in the first mainland. After all, they had destroyed the 10,000 Hells sect, so the other forces in the first mainland would definitely not remain indifferent. Similar to what Xiaochen had expected, Yu Shujin and the others came out of seclusion first, so they naturally had a brief understanding of the movements in the first mainland. It was difficult to find out what Yu Shujin had said. At this moment, the 10,000 Hells sect should be surrounded by spies from the various forces in the first mainland. Moreover, according to Yu Shujin's guess, they should have asked for help from the 7th wilderness will of the Heavenly Way. However, although the various forces in the first mainland had sent many spies to surround the 10,000 Hells sect, they didn't show any signs of taking action. They just watched from afar. They didn't even stop Yu Shujin and the other geniuses from the 7th wilderness from leaving the 10,000 Hells sect. They didn't have any intention of attacking. They were just monitoring. After hearing Yu Shujin's words, Xiaochen said indifferently. It's normal. They know that there's a great disparity in strength between us, so they naturally won't come looking for trouble. They're just monitoring our movements in case of emergencies. Xiaochen didn't find the actions of the various forces strange at all. It was very normal. What Xiaochen was really concerned about was whether the 7th wilderness will of the Heavenly Way had sent reinforcements, and whether they had arrived in the first mainland. He wanted to know how the reinforcements sent by the 7th wilderness will of the Heavenly Way were. However, Yu Shujin and the others didn't know. After all, they hadn't gone too far from the 10,000 Hells sect ever since they came out of seclusion, so the information they received was limited. There was no information about the 7th wilderness will of the Heavenly Way's reinforcements. Xiaochen pondered for a moment and said, "Forget it, let's wait for a while. We'll talk about it after everyone comes out of seclusion." There were still some skyprides from the two realms who hadn't come out of seclusion, so they naturally couldn't leave the 10,000 Hells sect. Moreover, Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu were also in seclusion, so they could only wait for a while. They planned to wait for everyone to come out of their seclusion before proceeding with the next step. As for the possible reinforcements sent by the first wilderness will of the Heavenly Way, they didn't have any good ideas now. Moreover, if the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way really sent reinforcements, then they would have to fight in the end. Therefore, there was no need to be too concerned about it now. The entire 10,000 Hells sect was surrounded by spies sent by the various forces in the first mainland. However, Xiaochen didn't pay any attention to them, nor did he order them to be eradicated. This was because it was a waste of time. There was no point in killing these spies. If you killed one, the various forces would send more spies in the next second. Of course, the most important thing was that it was meaningless. Begging for your collection, begging for votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1683. He ignored the spies outside. Since they wanted to spy on him and the others, let them do so. Anyway, now was not the time to make a move. Yi Xiao, Hong Xiu, and some of the other geniuses were still cultivating. There was no harm in waiting for a while. In the next few days, Xiaochen and the others continued to wait for Yi Xiao and the others to come out of their seclusion in the 10,000 Hells sect. Xiaochen cultivated by himself and also taught Wan Wan. However, Wan Wan's cultivation was a headache for Xiaochen. This little girl was simply lazy to the extreme when it came to cultivation. To put it simply, Xiaochen had to supervise her cultivation every day. Otherwise, this little girl would definitely not be diligent if she could be lazy. Moreover, she had already said that she would only cultivate for an hour every day. In that case, even if it was more than a breath's time, this little girl would not cultivate. She clearly had top-notch talent, but this little girl was unwilling to cultivate. This really gave Xiaochen a headache. He was extremely helpless. This morning, as usual, Xiaochen was still supervising Luan Luan's cultivation. Luan Luan had a bitter and resentful look on her face. She had tried to act coquettishly, but Xiaochen still refused to budge on this matter. Just as Xiaochen was supervising Luan Luan's cultivation, Hong Xiu also came out of her seclusion and immediately went to look for Xiaochen. Hong Xiu had also benefited a lot from her seclusion this time. Her cultivation had also broken through to the perfect quasi-sage realm. It could be said that her improvement was obvious. When she arrived at Xiaochen's place and saw Xiaochen teaching Luan Luan, Hong Xiu smiled and said, "I have never seen you so patient." In Hong Xiu's opinion, Xiaochen absolutely did not have the patience to teach others cultivation. Hearing her words, Xiaochen smiled bitterly in his heart. Impatient? Ah, it was not that he was impatient, but that little girl Luan Luan was impatient. As expected, when Hong Xiu arrived, Luan Luan immediately stopped cultivating. She smiled brightly at Xiaochen and said coquettishly, "Daddy, do you have something to talk about?" Luan Luan won't disturb Daddy. I will go outside and cultivate by myself. After saying that, Luan did not wait for Xiaochen's reply and ran out of the courtyard. Seeing Luan left, Hong Xiu, who did not know the truth. Luan. Xiu Hongxiu thought that Luan had gone out to train by herself, but Xiaochen knew that the little girl was not training at all. She had gone out to play. Xiaochen gradually got over the fact that the little girl did not like to cultivate. If she did not like it, then so be it. After all, with the little girl's talent, it would not be a problem for her to become an expert in the future. In just a few days, Luan had already reached the beginning of the Mystic Aeon realm. What kind of concept was this? It had only been less than 10 days since he had stepped onto the martial path. However, Luan had already gone from an ordinary person without any cultivation to a Mystic Aeon realm cultivator. Xiaochen had never heard of such a speed. Luan left with a leap of 3 feet. Hong Xiu then sat down beside Xiaochen. The two of them began to discuss their next move. Now, except for Yi Xiao, the others had basically all come out of seclusion. Next, they only needed to wait for Yi Xiao to come out of seclusion. Then, they could continue with their plan. Xiaochen did not have many ideas about the next plan of action. In Xiaochen's opinion, their purpose in coming to the first mainland was to cause chaos in the first mainland. It was best to make the people panic. They did not need to directly occupy the first mainland. As long as they made the people of the first mainland panic, the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way would continue to send reinforcements to the first mainland. That would be considered a success. Xiao Chen's next plan was to continue attacking the other great sage sects of the first mainland. It was a simple and brutal plan. Hong Xiu did not have any objections to Xiao Chen's plan. Anyway, she would do whatever Xiao Chen said. After chatting with Xiao Chen for a while, Hong Xiu saw that Xiao Chen did not have much intention to talk to her. She then got up and left. She was going to see the little girl, Luan Luan. Hearing that Hong Xiu was going to see Luan Luan, Xiao Chen naturally did not stop her. It was good that she left. He could cultivate in peace. After Hong Xiu left, Xiao Chen began to train by himself in the courtyard. Xiao Chen was indeed very hard-working when it came to training, as he needed power. Only with power would he be able to bring his family back to life and protect them. While Xiao Chen and the others were waiting for Yi Xiao to come out of seclusion, in a sect called the Black King sect not far from the 10,000 Hell sect, the reinforcements sent by the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way to the first mainland were already waiting there. This time, the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had sent two immortal realm powerhouses, a group of great sage realm and quasi-sage realm powerhouses to support the first mainland. However, to be honest, the reinforcements sent by the first wilderness will of the heavenly way were not as strong as Xiao Chen and the others. In terms of strength, the two immortal realm powerhouses from the seventh wilderness were definitely not a match for Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao. After all, Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao were immortal realm powerhouses who had condensed the heavenly immortal mansions. Their strength was comparable to immortal venerables. However, the two immortal realm powerhouses from the seventh wilderness had only condensed the earth immortal mansions. Of course, it was not that the seventh wilderness did not want to send reinforcements. It was just that they had no other choice. Currently, the attacks from the two worlds on the seventh mainland were getting fiercer and fiercer. The seventh will of the heavenly way and the eighth will of the heavenly way were already somewhat difficult to deal with. The seventh will of the heavenly way had sent Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Long Yang, Tian Mushi, and the Divine Lord to the first mainland because of their injuries and lack of reinforcements. Naturally, they were sent because of Xiao Chen. The seventh will of the heavenly way knew that these people were Xiao Chen's old friends, especially Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. They were Xiao Chen's elder brother and second sister. How would Xiao Chen choose to stop Xiao Chen when the time came? Would he disregard their old friendship and fight with them, then kill them all? Or would he choose to retreat because of their old friendship? It could be said that the seventh will of the heavenly way had set its sights on Xiao Chen because it no longer had any stronger reinforcements to support the first mainland. Moreover, the seventh will of the heavenly way was indeed ruthless, at least to Xiao Chen. They did not know that Long Qing, Xianyuan Ling, and the others had also come to the first mainland. One day later, Yi Xiao came out of seclusion. Like Xiao Chen, Yi Xiao had also successfully broken through to the profound immortal realm. However, he had used much more time than Xiao Chen. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1684. Yi Xiao had finally come out of seclusion. Naturally, it was time for them to take action. Of course, before that, Xiao Chen also divided the various cultivation resources of the 10,000 Hells sect equally among the geniuses of the two realms. Luo Li and Hong Lian had already said that they did not need to hand over all the cultivation resources they had obtained during the attack on the first mainland. Everyone could distribute them among themselves. Since they did not need to hand over the cultivation resources they had plundered, Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao naturally distributed them to everyone. The cultivation resources that a great sage sect had accumulated over countless years were all distributed equally to everyone. This made the geniuses of the two realms extremely excited. Who would complain about having too many cultivation resources? Of course, Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao also kept those cultivation resources that were useful to them. Now that the 10,000 Hells sect had been destroyed, the cultivation resources were divided among everyone. On this day, on the 10,000 Hells sect's main square, Xiao Chen looked at the geniuses of the two realms in front of him and said indifferently, It's almost time to move. Let's deal with these ants around us first. Go! Upon hearing Xiao Chen's order, the geniuses of the two realms all soared into the sky and immediately started killing in all directions. Previously, they had almost grasped the location of the spies of the various major forces around the 10,000 Hells sect. At this time, following Xiao Chen's order, the geniuses also began to clean up the area. The cultivation of the spies sent by the various sects naturally could not be too high. Therefore, it was not too troublesome to deal with them. Soon, all the spies around the 10,000 Hells sect were cleaned up. Then, everyone boarded the starship and headed in the direction of the Black King sect. The Black King sect was Xiao Chen's second target. As for the reason, there was nothing special. It was because the Black King sect was the nearest great sage sect to the 10,000 Hells sect, so Xiao Chen chose it. On the starship, the group rushed towards the Black King sect. On the way, Xiao Chen was still cultivating. On the other side, Hong Xiu was teasing Luan Luan. However, looking at Luan Luan's expression, it seemed that she was not too interested in her. Luan, do you remember what I said? From now on, I'm your mother, do you understand? She is your father's wife. Holy shit, Hong Xiu actually made a move on Luan, forcing Luan to acknowledge her as her mother. Naturally, Hong Xiu only had one goal in mind, and that was Xiao Chen. Now that Xiao Chen had recognized Luan as his daughter, if Hong Xiu became her mother, wouldn't it mean that Hong Xiu and Xiao Chen were husband and wife? It could be said that she was simply fooling around. However, with Hong Xiu's character, it was not surprising that she would do such a thing. Unfortunately, upon hearing Hong Xiu's words, Luan said with some doubt, "But you're clearly not father's wife. Only father's wife is Luan's mother." You! Upon hearing Luan's words, Serenity was infuriated. She had been trying to convince Luan about this since yesterday, but this little lass didn't listen, which hurt Serenity's feelings. She took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. Then, she revealed an amiable smile and said to Luan, look. Luan, look, although I'm not your father's wife now, one day I will be. When that time comes, I'll still be your mother. Besides, don't you want a mother? Yes, Luan wants a mother. But Luan's mother can only be someone that father likes. If father doesn't like her, then Luan won't like her either. Luan nodded adorably. That's right. Your father likes me, but he's a little shy, so he doesn't dare to admit it. Hong Xiu was still in the midst of her brainwashing. She wholeheartedly wanted Luan to call her mother so that she could become Xiao Chen's wife. Although it was a little ridiculous, it did make sense. Xiao Chen didn't know about this. If Xiao Chen knew that Hong Xiu was actually aiming her evil claws at a 4-year-old little girl, he would probably scold her for being worse than a beast. She wouldn't even let a little girl go. In order to get closer to Xiao Chen, Hong Xiu was trying her best. Of course, Hong Xiu was also very fond of Luan. She believed that no one would dislike Luan. After all, this little girl was so cute. Xiao Chen's group headed towards the Black King sect unhurriedly. At the same time, the Black King sect had also received the news. At this moment, in the main hall of the Black King sect, a group of experts from the Black King sect and the reinforcements from the 7th Wilderness had gathered. The 2 Immortal Realm experts sat on the main seats. One of them said in a deep voice, "The remnants of the 2 worlds are here. It's time to get ready." The 2 Immortal Realm experts had been staying in the Black King sect all this while. Their purpose was to wait for Xiao Chen's group to take the initiative to attack. Therefore, they had made a lot of preparations in the Black King sect. Moreover, they had also upgraded the Black King sect's defensive formation from the Saint grade to the Immortal grade in order to defend against Xiao Chen's group. However, the key to this battle wasn't the 2 Immortal Realm experts, but Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others. Therefore, as soon as the Immortal Realm expert finished speaking, the other Immortal Realm expert beside him spoke. Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Long Yang, Tian Mushi, Sir God, your mission is to stop and kill Xiao Chen. You must take good care of the treasures that the heavenly Tao bestowed upon you. This is your only chance to kill Xiaochen. Asking Xianyuanling and the other four to kill Xiaochen was probably something only a despicable person like the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way would do. Xianyuanling and the other four were only in the quasi-sage realm. In terms of combat strength, the five of them weren't even comparable to Hong Xiu. Asking them to kill Xiaochen was simply a joke. However, the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way knew very well that Xiaochen wouldn't be able to kill the five of them. It was really because the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way knew about the relationship between Xiaochen and the five of them that the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had sent the five of them to the first mainland to stop Xiaochen. If the five of them could stop Xiaochen, a ferocious tiger, it would definitely be a profitable deal. Of course, if they didn't succeed and Xiaochen killed the five of them regardless of their past relationship, it wouldn't be a loss to the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way. After all, Xianyuanling and the other four were too weak. If they died, so be it. It wouldn't affect the seventh wilderness much. Regardless of the final outcome, the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way wouldn't suffer a loss. Hearing the immoral realm's words, the five of them immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. Sir, don't worry. Even if we have to risk our lives, we'll definitely kill that traitor Xiaochen here. That's great. If you can kill Xiaochen this time, you'll be the heroes of the seventh wilderness, the immoral realm's immoral realm replied with a smile. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1685. Only the will of the heavenly way of the seventh wilderness could come up with such a plan to let Xianyuanling and the other four deal with Xiaochen. Of course, judging from the current situation, this was also the best choice that the will of the heavenly way of the seventh wilderness could make. Unaware that Xianyuanling and the other four were now in the Black King sect, Xiaochen and the others set off from the 10,000 Hell sect. One day later, they arrived at the Black King sect. As a great sage sect, the Black King sect was obviously weaker than the 10,000 Hell sect. In terms of the number of the great sage, the Black King sect was inferior to the 10,000 Hell sect, with only 2. The Black King sect only had 2 the great sage, but this made no difference to Xiaochen and the others. One more the great sage or one less the great sage was the same to Xiaochen and the others. It didn't matter. The black starship slowly appeared in the sky above the Black King sect. At the same time, the Black King sect's Great Sect Protection Formation was also activated. Because of the support sent by the will of the heavenly way of the seventh wilderness, the Black King sect's Great Sect Protection Formation was upgraded from the original Sage level formation to the current Immortal level formation. Xiaochen and Yi Xiao, who were on the Black Starship, could sense that the sect protecting formation of the Black King sect had reached the level of an immortal technique. Both of them guessed that the powerhouses of the seventh wilderness had already arrived at the Black King sect. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the Black King sect to construct an immortal level formation on their own. However, it was also good that the seventh wilderness powerhouses had appeared in the Black King sect, which saved them a lot of trouble. After defeating them in one fell swoop, no one in the first mainland could stop Xiaochen and the others. Xiaochen and Yi Xiao were also bold. Of course, the two of them were certain that the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way would not send too many reinforcements. After all, the seventh mainland was the main battlefield. If they sent too many reinforcements to the first mainland, then what could the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way use to deal with the reinforcements of the other 2 realms? Moreover, with Xiaochen and Yi Xiao's combat strength, they wouldn't be too afraid even if they were to face immortal venerables. Especially now that both of them had broken through to the profound immortal realm, they were even stronger than before. Xiaochen and Yi Xiao had calm expressions as they looked at the formation before them. At the same time, many figures soared into the sky from the Black King sect. Originally, there were only 2 the Great Sage in the Black King sect, but now, there were more than 20 the Great Sage in front of Xiaochen. Obviously, the Great Sage from the other sects in the first mainland had mostly gathered in the Black King sect. Along with the appearance of more than 20 the Great Sage from the first mainland, the 2 Immortal Realm experts sent by the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way, as well as Xianyuanling and the rest, also appeared in front of Xiao Chen. From the beginning to the end, Xiao Chen hadn't changed at all. Even when the great sage appeared in front of him, Xiao Chen's expression remained indifferent. However, at this moment, when Xiao Chen saw Xian Yuanling and the other four, a strange light flashed across his eyes. He didn't expect that Xian Yuanling and the other four would also come to the first mainland. This time, Xiao Chen was bound to fight with them. Given Xiao Chen's strength, Xian Yuanling and the other four naturally could not pose any threat to him. However, could Xiao Chen really kill the five of them? Obviously, it was impossible. He looked at Xian Yuanling and the other four with a complicated expression. At the same time, Xian Yuanling and the rest also stared at Xiao Chen. However, unlike Xiao Chen, when Xian Yuanling and the other four looked at Xiao Chen, there was only intense hatred in their eyes. That's right, when facing Xiao Chen, there was only hatred in their eyes. That hatred was as if they wanted to skin Xiao Chen alive. Unlike Wine Taoist, Xian Yuanling and the rest had their memories tampered with by the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way. After their memories were tampered with, the five of them had changed everything about Xiao Chen. Therefore, they no longer remembered their former friendship. Now, the only memory they had of Xiao Chen was hatred. It was a hatred that was deeply engraved in the depths of their souls. Their expressions were very complicated. Sensing the change in Xiao Chen, Hong Xiu asked with concern, "Xiao Chen, are you okay? Do you know them?" It was obvious that Xiao Chen had changed completely after seeing Xian Yuanling and the other four. Hong Xiu could naturally guess that Xiao Chen and Xian Yuanling and the other four should know each other. Facing Hong Xiu's concern, Xiao Chen did not hide anything. He nodded calmly and said, "Yes, they're old friends." "Brother Xiao Chen, if you can't do it, leave the five of them to me," Yi Xiao said after hearing Xiao Chen's words. Yi Xiao naturally did not know that Xian Yuanling and Long Qing were Xiao Chen's elder brother and second sister. He only thought that Xian Yuanling and the other four were people that Xiao Chen knew in the seventh wilderness. Therefore, Yi Xiao took the initiative to speak. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen immediately shook his head and said, "There's no need. I'll handle it myself. However, I'll leave the two immortal realm mighty figures to you. Don't play around this time. The great sage on the other side is many. We're at a disadvantage." Obviously, he could not watch Yi Xiao kill Xian Yuanling and the other four. Therefore, Xiao Chen did not accept Yi Xiao's kindness. At the same time, he warned Yi Xiao that this time, he had to end the battle quickly. After all, most of the great sage from the first mainland had gathered together. In terms of numbers, they had already surpassed the number of sky prides from the two realms. Yi Xiao did not object to Xiao Chen's words. He nodded calmly and took out an immortal level array breaking disc from his storage ring. He immediately prepared to break the array. An immortal level array would naturally not be able to stop Xiao Chen and the others. At this moment, the great sage from the Black King sect spoke to the two immortal realm mighty figures beside him. "My lord, how long can this immortal level array last?" They thought that the immortal level array might be able to hold off Xiao Chen and the others for a while. Unfortunately, one of the immortal realm mighty figures replied calmly. 100 breaths at most. An immortal level array could only hold off Xiao Chen and the others for 100 breaths at most. Everyone's expression changed slightly when they heard this. 100 breaths. In other words, this immortal level array was actually not very useful. Of course, these people did not know how terrifying the immortal level array breaking disc was. It could even break the Dark Prisons array, let alone the Black King sect's low-grade immortal level array. The two immortal realm mighty figures glanced at Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao on the black starship. Then, one of them turned to Xian Yuanling and the others and said, "Follow the plan. Leave Yi Xiao to us. The five of you are in charge of dealing with Xiao Chen. As long as we can get rid of the two of them, the rest will be simple." Xian Yuanling and the others immediately nodded when they heard the immortal realm mighty figure's words. "Yes. Please collect, vote, recommend." Chapter 1686. Xian Yuanling and the other four nodded. At this moment, Yi Xiao had already used the Immortal Great Array breaking disc. Without much resistance, the Black King Sect's protective array was quickly broken. A protective array like the Black King Sect's was almost powerless in front of the Immortal Great Array breaking disc. It could not block it at all. After the array was broken, both sides faced each other. Xiaochen took the lead and said, "Let's do it." There was nothing much to say. Hearing this, Yi Xiao and the other geniuses from the two realms also made their moves. As for the Black King Sect, according to their previous agreement, the two Immortal Realm powers were in charge of dealing with Yi Xiao, while Xianyuan Ling and the other four were in charge of dealing with Xiaochen. The battle was about to start. As for Xiaochen, he said something to Hong Xiu and then flew towards the Black King Sect. "Stay here and protect Luan Luan." He did not let Hong Xiu make a move but asked her to protect Luan Luan. Hearing this, Hong Xiu did not say anything and stayed on the spaceship to protect Luan Luan. Xiaochen met Xianyuan Ling and the other four all the way to the sky above the Black King Sect. They faced each other and felt the extremely strong killing intent from Xianyuan Ling and the other four. Xiaochen's face did not change at all. However, although it seemed so on the surface, Xiaochen was feeling extremely complicated in his heart. Facing Xianyuan Ling and the other four, Xiaochen really could not do it. Unfortunately, Xiaochen could not do it. However, Xianyuan Ling and the other four were determined to kill Xiaochen. Without any nonsense, the five of them immediately chose to attack Xiaochen together. With their memories tampered with, Xianyuan Ling and the other four's hatred for Xiaochen was monstrous. They did not show any mercy when they attacked. They were completely aiming to kill Xiaochen. However, with the strength of Xianyuan Ling and the other four, it was still impossible for them to kill Xiaochen. However, in the face of their attacks, Xiaochen did not retaliate. Instead, he only dodged. Without even using the dustless sword, Xiaochen kept dodging the attacks of Xianyuan Ling and the other four with his bare hands. Xiaochen couldn't do it. Otherwise, with Xiaochen's current strength, he could indeed easily kill Xianyuan Ling and the other four. However, Xiaochen couldn't do so. He only dodged the attacks of Xianyuan Ling and the other four. Facing Xiaochen's dodging, Xianyuan Ling and the other four did not hold back, but they still could not hurt Xiaochen. On one side, Xiaochen was fighting fiercely with Xianyuan Ling and the other four. On the other side, Yi Xiao was also fighting fiercely with the two Immortal State Almighties. In terms of strength, the two Immortal State Almighties were naturally no match for Yi Xiao. After all, Yi Xiao was in existence who had formed the Heavenly Immortal Mansion. In terms of combat strength, the two Immortal State Almighties could only be considered ordinary among the Immortal State Almighties. However, in order to support the First Mainland, the two Immortal State Almighties had indeed made a lot of preparations. After fighting for a while, one of them took out several Immortal State talismans from his storage ring and shot them at Yi Xiao. In an instant, an Immortal State array appeared and enveloped Yi Xiao. Since they were no match for Yi Xiao, they could only use other means to deal with Yi Xiao. However, even though Yi Xiao was enveloped by the array, he was not nervous at all. On the contrary, the corners of his mouth curled into a mocking smile. "You want to compete with me in terms of treasures?" The two Immortal State Almighties clearly intended to use their various Dharma treasures to deal with Yi Xiao. However, they did not know that they were simply courting death. As the heir of the Eighth Realm, Yi Xiao was armed to the teeth with treasures from head to toe. If the two Immortal State Almighties wanted to compete with Yi Xiao in terms of Dharma treasures, wouldn't that be suicide? Did they have a death wish? With that, Yi Xiao did not care about the talisman array that trapped him at all. He also took out several talismans from his storage ring and waved his hand. The talismans shot out and immediately bombarded the talisman array. It did not take much effort to break the two people's talisman arrays. After that, a smile flashed in Yi Xiao's eyes. He once again took out dozens of talismans from his storage ring. Moreover, these talismans had all reached the immortal grade. Competing with treasures? This is your Grandpa Ye's favorite. Come, take a look at your Grandpa Ye's talismans. With that, Yi Xiao did not hesitate at all. Nor did he feel any heartache. The talismans in his hand shot out directly and instantly attacked the two immortal state almighties. Even the two immortal state almighties felt their scalps go numb at the sight of dozens of immortal state almighties. It should be known that the value of an immortal state talisman was completely incomparable to that of a saint state talisman. The difference in value between the two could be described as the difference between heaven and earth. In other words, the value of an immortal state talisman was at least equivalent to the value of hundreds of saint state talismans. It was very precious. The reason why immortal state talismans were so precious was that firstly, they were extremely difficult to make and the requirements were very high. Secondly, there were very few immortal state talisman masters. Hence, there were naturally not many immortal state talisman masters who could make immortal state talismans. However, in the hands of Yi Xiao, these immortal state talismans were like white paper. He did not feel any heartache at all. The moment he attacked, dozens of immortal state talismans shot out directly at the two immortal state almighties. The two immortal state almighties probably did not know that Yi Xiao had at least thousands of immortal state talismans like this. Dozens of immortal state talismans were nothing to him. Competing with Yi Xiao using treasures was akin to seeking death. The treasures on Yi Xiao's body were things that even many immortal emperor state almighties would covet. In the face of dozens of immortal state almighties' attacks, the two immortal state almighties' expressions changed slightly. However, the two of them quickly took out a jade token from their storage rings. This jade token was given to them by the will of the heavenly way of the seventh wilderness. It could be used for defense and was very powerful. Without any hesitation, they crushed the jade token. Immediately, a golden light was emitted from the jade token, instantly protecting the two of them. The attack of dozens of immortal state talisman arrays was successfully neutralized by the two jade tokens. The two immortal state almighties were also not injured. Seeing this, Yi Xiao's eyes flashed with a cold smile. They still have trump cards? Yi Xiao was not angry that his attacks were blocked. On the contrary, he looked at the two immortal state almighties with a cold smile. Not bad. You have quite a lot of trump cards. However, I have at least thousands of immortal state talismans like the previous one. I don't know how long you can withstand it. As he spoke, Yi Xiao's storage ring flashed and hundreds of immortal state talismans appeared in his hand. Seeing this, the two immortal state almighties could not help but twitch the corners of their mouths. These immortal state talismans were like cabbages in Yi Xiao's hands. He could casually produce dozens or hundreds of them. How could they survive? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1687. The number of Dharma treasures Yi Xiao had made the two immortals' scalps go numb. Actually, the seventh will of the heavenly way had given them many good things to help the first mainland this time. They had thought that with these Dharma treasures, they would be able to fight against Yi Xiao. However, in terms of Dharma treasures, Yi Xiao was miles ahead of them. It made sense. As the heir of the eighth realm, Yi Xiao had more Dharma treasures than them. Moreover, the seventh Baron's will of the heavenly way had sent them here to be cannon fodder. Because the seventh will of the heavenly way could not spare any manpower, they could only send some people to help the first mainland. As for whether they would succeed in the end, the seventh will of the heavenly way did not care too much. To put it bluntly, these two immortals, Xianyuan Ling, and the rest had been abandoned by the seventh will of the heavenly way long ago. After all, with their strength, how could they possibly stop Xiaochen, Yi Xiao, and the other prodigies from the two realms? They had been betrayed without knowing it. In their opinion, the seventh will of the heavenly way would never abandon them. However, they did not know that they had been abandoned long ago. Yi Xiao did not take the two immortal realm mighty figures seriously at all. On the other side, Xiaochen, who was fighting fiercely with Xianyuan Ling and the other four, had no intention of making a move from the beginning to the end. Facing the attacks of Xianyuan Ling and the other four, Xiaochen had always chosen to dodge. If Xiaochen wanted to, it would not be an exaggeration to say that he could definitely kill Xianyuan Ling and the rest instantly. After all, their cultivation levels were very different. However, Xiaochen did not have such thoughts. Of course, he could not do it. They could not hurt Xiaochen at all. After fighting for so long, Xianyuanling and the rest could not even touch Xiaochen's clothes. The murderous intent in Xianyuanling's eyes did not diminish. He looked at Xiaochen and shouted angrily, "Xiaochen, do you only know how to dodge? Do you only know how to dodge when you kill your own father and wife? Kill your own father and wife?" Hearing Xianyuanling's words, Xiaochen's eyes flashed with sadness. His movements also paused. While Xiaochen was in a daze, Longqing successfully seized the opportunity and punched Xiaochen in the chest. Xiaochen was instantly forced back a few steps, and a trace of blood flowed from his mouth. Xiaochen's heart was filled with sorrow when he heard his elder brother say that. He ignored his injuries and looked at Xianyuanling. His voice was a little hoarse as he said, "Brother Xianyuan. Big brother, do you really think that I would kill my own father and wife?" Xiaochen did not know that Xianyuanling and the rest had their memories tampered with by the seventh wilderness's will of the heavenly way. Therefore, when he heard Xianyuanling's words, Xiaochen only felt heartache. Xianyuanling was clearly the person closest to him, but now he had become the person who hated him the most. No one else could understand this feeling. Only Xiaochen himself could understand the bitterness. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xianyuanling's expression did not change. He snorted coldly and said, "Humph, isn't that so?" Xianyuanling was obviously convinced that Xiaochen was the bastard who killed his father and wife. Seeing that Xianyuanling wanted to skin him alive, Xiaochen showed a smile on his face. However, this smile was a little bleak no matter how one looked at it. Xiaochen took a deep breath and slowly said, "Big brother, you and I have been sworn brothers since we were young. From the heavenly Chen continent until now, you know very well what kind of person I am. No matter what, I, Xiaochen, would never do such a thing. Furthermore, Shuru, Baihua, Lingyao, Tianyue, and my father and mother are all my family. How could I do anything to them?" No one could understand the sadness in his heart. At this moment, Xiaochen opened his mouth to explain to Xianyuanling and Longqing for the first time. Xianyuanling and Longqing's position in Xiaochen's heart was naturally unquestionable. Xiaochen could not do anything to them. At the same time, he did not want to see the two of them bear such a grudge against him. From Xiaochen's point of view, the two of them were his brothers. They should be the people who trusted him the most. However, why did Xianyuanling and Longqing hate him so much? They could not wait to kill him with their own hands. How could Xiaochen kill his own father and wife? They were Xiaochen's family. They were the people that Xiaochen loved the most. How could Xiaochen kill them? The rims of his eyes were slightly red. The pair of blood-red eyes looked even more demonic under the contrast of the tears. However, anyone could feel the sadness emanating from Xiaochen's body. That feeling was really unbearable. Hearing Xiaochen's words and seeing Xiaochen's sad side, Xianyuanling and Longqing were both stunned. The hatred in their hearts did not diminish. This was the effect of the seventh wilderness's will of the heavenly way tampering with their memories. However, in addition to hatred, Xianyuanling and Longqing also felt a sense of sadness in their hearts. It was as if they felt the same way seeing Xiaochen in such a sorrowful state. It was the first time that the two of them had experienced such a strange and complicated feeling. They stood there in a daze. Soon, Xianyuanling and Longqing suddenly hugged their heads in pain. It was as if they were enduring some great pain. Their faces had become extremely ferocious. They did not know why, but after the strange feeling earlier, Xianyuanling and Longqing only felt a splitting headache. It was as if their heads were about to explode. They hugged their heads tightly. The intense pain made Xianyuanling and Longqing's minds a little blurry. At the same time, some inexplicable scenes began to flash through their minds. It was just a flash, and it was very blurry. The two of them did not know what it meant at all. However, these scenes were really what the three of them had experienced. Of course, it was only a part of it. Facing Xiaochen, the memories that had been tampered with by the seventh wilderness's will of the heavenly way began to loosen. The real memories that had been deeply buried in the depths of their minds began to surface. However, due to the restraint of the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way, these memories only flashed past. Two types of memories and two types of powers collided in their minds, which also caused Xianyuan Ling and Wang Qing to have splitting headaches as though their heads were about to explode. Xianyuan Ling gritted his teeth and blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Xiaochen was worried when he saw the two of them in pain. He was about to step forward to help when Xianyuan Ling endured the pain and shouted angrily at the top of his lungs, "Brother Xianyuan! Don't come over, Xiaochen. Our brotherhood has long been severed. You killed your father and wife. I will definitely kill you in this lifetime. Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1688. Although he had a splitting headache, the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way still had the upper hand. Upon hearing Xianyuan Ling's words, Xiaochen stopped what he was doing. Looking at Xianyuan Ling and Wang Qing's pained expressions, Xiaochen opened his mouth but did not say anything in the end. He did not know why Xianyuan Ling and Wang Qing hated him so much that they were not even willing to trust him. However, this scene made Xiaochen feel extremely pained. He did not know what to say. All Xiaochen could do now was to remain silent. He looked at Xianyuan Ling and Wang Qing with a complicated expression. At the same time, on the other side, Yi Xiao did not waste any time because of Xiao Chen's instructions. He had already killed the two Immortal Realm mighty figures. After Yi Xiao killed the two Immortal Realm mighty figures, the morale of the First Mainland's side naturally plummeted. Moreover, with the addition of Yi Xiao, the situation of the battle quickly tilted towards the Two Realms side. The great sage of the First Mainland was no match for Yi Xiao at all. They could not even block a single attack from Yi Xiao. Blood rained down from the sky as the great sage of the First Mainland fell one by one. In front of Yi Xiao, the great sage really did not have any power to fight back. They were very, very weak. The outcome of the battle seemed to have been decided. On Xiao Chen's side, Xianyuan Ling and Wang Qing's intense headache slowly dissipated as time passed. After a while, the two of them finally recovered. However, after what had just happened, it was not difficult to see that their faces were abnormally pale and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of their mouths. At the same time, after the intense pain, the two of them looked at Xiaochen with a confused look in their eyes. Earlier, images flashed through their minds. However, those images were completely different from their original memories. The disparity was enormous. Although these images only flashed past, the two of them still saw some of them. They seemed to be images of them being together with Xiaochen. However, these images seemed to be different from their memories. In the images, the three of them trusted each other so much and were so close to each other. The sudden images completely conflicted with their memories. Therefore, Xianyuan Ling and Wang Qing looked at Xiaochen with a confused look in their eyes. The two of them did not know that there were actually some cracks in the memories that the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had tampered with. That was why they could see the real images in their memories and recall some fragments of it. However, it was not that easy to completely break through the memories that the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had tampered with. At least, it was not possible at the moment. Even so, there were some cracks in the memories that the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had tampered with. Therefore, Xianyuan Ling and Wang Qing's attitude towards Xiaochen had changed slightly. Apart from hatred, there was also a hint of confusion. The battle around them was still ongoing. After killing more than 10 the great sage, the victory was decided. Yi Xiao also came to Xiaochen's side. Looking at Xianyuan Ling, Wang Qing and the other four in front of him, Yi Xiao's eyes flashed with a faint chill. He then sneered. "Brother Xiaochen, you can't do it. Why don't I help you?" He had long seen that Xiaochen could not bear to do anything to Xianyuan Ling, Wang Qing, and the others. Otherwise, with Xiaochen's strength, the five of them would have been beheaded long ago. Hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiaochen shook his head and refused. No, don't do anything. Naturally, he could not let Yi Xiao do anything to Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing. Xiaochen looked at Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing and said calmly, "Brothers are brothers in our hearts. We'll be brothers for life. Big brother, second sister, you don't believe me now, but one day, you'll definitely know the truth. Leave." Xiaochen did not have any intention of continuing to attack Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing. He let the two of them leave. In fact, Xiaochen had thought of bringing the two of them back to the seventh realm by force. However, their situation was different from Wine Daoists. Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing were obviously much more hostile to him. If he brought the two of them back to the seventh realm by force, Xiaochen was worried that the two of them would commit suicide. At that time, Xiaochen would probably really regret it. Xiaochen's guess was not wrong at all. The two of them had their memories tampered with by the will of the heavenly way of the seventh wilderness. If Xiaochen really brought the two of them back to the seventh realm by force, the two of them might really commit suicide. In order to prevent Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing from doing anything extreme, and to prevent himself from regretting it, Xiaochen did not use extreme methods. Moreover, in Xiaochen's heart, he always believed that one day, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing would believe in him. Just as Xiaochen said, being brothers was a lifelong thing. Perhaps they did not understand him today and bore a grudge against him, but one day, they would understand everything. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing's expressions were complicated. However, Yi Xiao, who was beside them, was somewhat displeased. Let them go? Let them go so easily? Yi Xiao obviously did not want to let the five of them go so easily. After all, they were from the seventh wilderness. However, after hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiaochen immediately turned his head and stared at him coldly. His tone also became cold. I said let them go. Yi Xiao did not want to let the five of them leave just like that, but Xiaochen did not care. Seeing that Xiaochen was clearly angry, Yi Xiao smiled bitterly and did not say anything else. Seeing that Xiaochen was willing to let them go, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing looked at Xiaochen with complicated expressions. Their minds were in a mess, as if something was competing with each other in their minds. This was normal. This feeling was because cracks had appeared in the memories that the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had tampered with, and the two's true memories wanted to break through the seal. Therefore, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing's minds were in a mess. A situation like this would become more and more common in the future. This was because as time passed, the memories that the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had tampered with would become more and more fragile. It would become harder and harder to conceal the two's true memories. They looked at Xiaochen with complicated expressions. After a while, the battle came to an end. The first mainland had been defeated. At this time, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing turned around and prepared to leave. Seeing that the two of them were about to leave, Xiaochen suddenly spoke. Big brother, second sister, trust me. I, Xiaochen, have never changed. We will always be brothers. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing were clearly stunned. However, the two of them did not turn around. Instead, they tore through the void and left. Looking in the direction that Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing left, Xiaochen muttered to himself, one day, you will definitely believe me because we are brothers. Please add me to your collection, monthly vote, recommend me. Chapter 1689. In the face of Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing's hatred for him, Xiaochen naturally felt the pain in his heart. But in addition, Xiaochen also firmly believed that one day, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing would believe in him, because the three of them were brothers. The friendship between brothers, especially the seventh wasteland's will of the heavenly way, could be erased by tampering with their memories. Someone would respond to Xiaochen, but Xiaochen firmly believed in it. Withdrawing his gaze, Xiaochen glanced at the battle below that was still ongoing, but at this time, it was also coming to an end. Many experts of the first mainland were now dead or had fled, and there was no longer any power to resist. Not long after, the Black King sect was destroyed, And this time, it was not only the Black King sect that was destroyed. It should be known that the major forces of the 7 great continents had also sent people to support the Black King sect, but now they were all wiped out by Xiao Chen and the others. Just like when they faced the 10,000 Hells sect, all the experts above the Saint Realm were killed. As for the others, they fled, and Xiao Chen and the others did not chase after them. The battle ended very quickly, and the next stage was also coming to an end. Xiao Chen naturally did not need to take care of these things, only Yu Shujin went back to take care of it. She arranged for people to search the Black King sect, collect all the cultivation resources of the Black King sect, and wait for Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao to distribute them. Without caring about what happened next, Xiao Chen returned to the starship alone. Looking into the distance, Xiao Chen was still thinking about Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing. The two's state was a little strange, and Xiao Chen also felt this. But as for what was strange, Xiao Chen could not tell. After a long silence, Xiao Chen finally whispered softly, "Big brother, second sister, there will definitely be a day when you will understand everything. I will wait for that day to come." As soon as Xiao Chen's voice fell, Hong Xiu and Wan Wan walked in. As soon as they saw Xiao Chen, Wan Wan took the initiative to hug Xiao Chen. Seeing this, Xiao Chen had no choice but to comply with the little girl's wishes. Being held in Xiao Chen's arms, Wan Wan smiled sweetly, "Daddy, don't be angry, Wan will share some candy with you." Wan was a very smart child. She could sense that Xiao Chen was not in a good mood, so she took the initiative to stuff a candy into his mouth. Xiao Chen gradually calmed down when he saw how well-behaved Wan was. Perhaps this was the charm of a child. With Wan by his side, Xiao Chen's state of mind was very calm. The restlessness that he had felt earlier quickly disappeared. Xiao Chen smiled faintly and said, "Wan is so obedient." Wan was naturally very happy to be put on a show by Xiao Chen, but Hong Xiu was somewhat jealous and curled her lips. "Humph, that's not fair. Why have you never praised me?" She had spent a lot of time with Xiao Chen, but Xiao Chen had never praised her, and even rarely smiled at her. This made Hong Xiu jealous. Hearing Hong Xiu's words, Xiao Chen felt helpless in his heart. This Hong Xiu was really, how should he put it? She was already an adult, but she was actually jealous of a 4-year-old child. But looking at Hong Xiu's jealous face, Xiao Chen finally smiled and said, "You're also very good." These 2 women, one big and one small, both of whom he had to coax. Regarding this, Xiao Chen felt helpless, but there was nothing he could do. After all, these 2 women were sincerely good to him. It was especially so for Hong Xiu. After being by his side for so long, everything she did was for his sake. In the face of such a woman who was always considerate of him, even if a stone was kicked in his chest, it would still warm up. The outside world continued to wipe out the Black King sect, but Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao didn't care about it. They left it all to their subordinates. The Black King sect had been destroyed, and after this battle, not only did they defeat the reinforcements sent by the will of the Heavenly Way from the 7th Wilderness, but they also killed many powerful beings from the Great Sage of the First Mainland. In this way, after this battle, the First Mainland probably didn't have any power to resist. Next, Xiao Chen and the others could do whatever they wanted in the First Mainland. After the failure of the first reinforcement, the 7th Will of the Heavenly Way probably wouldn't send any more reinforcements. Of course, it wasn't that the 7th Will of the Heavenly Way didn't want to, but it simply didn't have any extra manpower. On the 7th Mainland, the 7th Will of the Heavenly Way was under a lot of pressure, so it didn't have the time to care about the situation in the First Mainland. The news of the Black King sect's destruction spread like a hurricane in the First Mainland. After the various great sage sects heard this news, they all felt despair. Now, who could stop Xiao Chen and the others? Obviously, there was no one left. Even the 2 immortal realm masters sent by the will of the Heavenly Way from the 7th Wilderness were killed by Yi Xiao. Needless to say, the others were no match for Yi Xiao and Xiao Chen at all. Despair shrouded the First Mainland. No one knew who Xiao Chen and the others' next target was. While the major forces in the First Mainland were in a state of panic, in the endless starry sky, Xian Yuanling, Wang Qing, and the others left the first mainland and rushed all the way to the seventh mainland. However, after a day of rushing, Xian Yuanling suddenly stopped. Seeing this, the Divine Lord asked, "What's wrong?" In the face of the Divine Lord's question, Xian Yuanling fell silent for a moment, then replied, "I'm a little confused. I don't want to go to the seventh mainland for the time being." Xian Yuanling's heart was indeed in a mess. An indescribable feeling lingered in his heart. This feeling made Xian Yuanling very uncomfortable. Not only Xian Yuanling, but also Long Qing. Therefore, the two of them did not want to go back to the seventh mainland for the time being. Instead, they wanted to travel around and have some peace and quiet to sort out the complicated feelings in their hearts. They did not want to go back to the seventh mainland. Hearing this, the Divine Lord and the others were stunned. Then, Long Yang looked at Long Qing and asked, "Sister, what do you mean? You're not going back? Then where are you going?" "I don't know. We just want to walk around and have some peace and quiet," Long Qing replied truthfully. After meeting Xiaochen, the two of them were indeed in a state of confusion. Their minds were in a mess. As soon as Long Qing finished speaking, Xian Yuanling did not say anything else. He cupped his hands at the Divine Lord and the others and said, "Sorry, we'll be leaving for a while. We'll naturally come back when we've thought things through. Goodbye." With that, Xian Yuanling left with Long Qing without waiting for the Divine Lord and the others to reply. The Divine Lord, Tianmushi, and Long Yang looked at each other as they watched the two of them leave. They could not figure out what was going on with the two of them. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1690. Xian Yuanling and Long Qing left immediately. No one knew where they went. Perhaps even Xian Yuanling and Long Qing didn't know where they were going. The Divine Lord, Tianmushi, and Long Yang couldn't figure out what had happened to Xian Yuanling and Long Qing. Why did they suddenly become like this? Of course, the three of them obviously didn't know that the reason why Xian Yuanling and Long Qing were like this was entirely due to a crack in the memory tampered with by the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way. At this time, the two memories were constantly fighting in the minds of Xian Yuanling and Long Qing, making them a little confused. Because of the deep relationship between the three brothers, a crack was forcibly torn in the memory tampered with by the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way. Now, Xian Yuanling and Long Qing really didn't know what to do. Xian Yuanling and Long Qing both left. On the first mainland, many geniuses of the two realms also collected all the cultivation resources of the Black King sect in one day. Just like before, Xiaochen, Yi Xiao, and Hong Xiu only took what they needed. As for the rest, they divided it equally among the geniuses of the two realms. From the 10,000 Hells sect to the Black King sect, the cultivation resources of the two great sage sects went into the pockets of the geniuses. In an instant, everyone's pockets were completely swollen. The harvest was great, but the real action had only just begun. Now that the experts sent by the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way had been killed by Yi Xiao, the next attack on the first mainland had become much easier. After all, the strongest expert on the first mainland was only in the Great Sage realm. During the battle at the Black King sect, more than half of them were killed by the geniuses of the two realms. In this way, the Great Sage had almost no ability to fight back. Therefore, Xiaochen and Yi Xiao also planned to change their strategy. He planned to scatter the group instead of moving together. In any case, there was no one in the first continent who could threaten them. As such, it would be more efficient to attack separately. Of course, the main reason for this was that Luoli had sent another message to Xiaochen, asking him to speed up and take down the first continent as soon as possible. Luoli was very anxious about the progress of the seventh mainland. Xiaochen and Yi Xiao had no choice but to speed up the progress. There were more than 1,000 skyprides from the two realms in total. Xiaochen and Yi Xiao had divided the crowd into 5 teams. Each team had about 200 people, and there were at least 3 skyprides in the Great Sage stage leading them. 3 eminent saint stage prodigies were leading 200 prodigies whose cultivation bases were not lower than the saint stage. Such a force was enough to wipe out any eminent saint sect in the first mainland. The 5 teams chose their own targets. After the battle, they would distribute the cultivation resources they obtained. As a result, their efficiency was obviously much faster than before. The next morning, the 5 teams set off from the Black King sect and headed in different directions. They each chose their own targets. After everyone left, Xiaochen, Yi Xiao, Hong Xiu, and Wan Wan boarded a starship and continued to head towards the core of the first mainland. With Xiaochen and the others' strength, they could do whatever they wanted in the first mainland. Therefore, the 4 of them had nothing to worry about. According to Luo Li's orders, Xiaochen sped up the attack on the first mainland. In just a few days, the first mainland was engulfed in the flames of war. Since Xiaochen did not set any rules, the sky prides from the 2 realms did not only target the eminent saint sects. Like a swarm of locusts, the sky prides from the 2 realms destroyed all the forces they encountered along the way. Of course, the sky prides from the 2 realms only killed cultivators at the saint stage and above. As for the others, they did not kill too many of them. The sky prides from the 2 realms could not be bothered with these ants. In just a few days, the forces were destroyed one after another. At the same time, the reputation of Xiaochen and the others in the first mainland was completely ruined. In the eyes of countless cultivators from the first mainland, Xiaochen and the others were demons and beasts. They were extremely cruel and hated by both men and gods. However, they obviously did not consider that the 2 desolates and the 2 realms were at war with each other. What did Xiaochen and the others do wrong? Moreover, Xiaochen and the others did not massacre the common people, nor did they massacre the cities. The people they killed were the top powers from the first mainland. The 2 sides were in a hostile state. It was normal for them to attack and kill each other. If there was anyone to blame, they could only blame the first mainland for being too weak. In other words, the 7th will of the Heavenly Way did not care about the first mainland and had completely abandoned them. That's right, the first mainland had been completely abandoned. Ever since the battle with the Black King sect, the 7th will of the Heavenly Way had not sent anyone to support the first mainland. It was as if they were leaving the first mainland to fend for itself. The powerful forces from the first mainland were destroyed one after another. The cultivators from the first mainland hated Xiaochen and the others to the core. Unfortunately, they could only hate them because they did not have the forces to contend with Xiaochen and the others. It could be said that the first mainland was completely engulfed in the flames of war. Many forces from the first mainland had joined forces to resist the attack of the 2 realms' heaven's prides. Unfortunately, their alliance was still useless in front of the 2 realms' heaven's prides. They were easily defeated by the 2 realms' heaven's prides. As they attacked the first mainland, they collected all kinds of cultivation resources. In less than 10 days, only 3 supreme saint sects on the first mainland were still alive. Only 3 great saint sects were still alive. However, based on the current situation, it was only a matter of time before these 3 great saint sects were destroyed. The situation had developed to this point, and the fall of the first mainland was almost inevitable. Even so, the 7th will of the Heavenly Way still did not have the slightest intention of helping. He was still watching coldly from the sidelines. It was as if he would rather watch the first mainland perish than do anything. Everything was proceeding smoothly, and the first mainland was powerless to fight back. On this day, after Xiaochen and Yi Xiao destroyed another great saint sect, Yi Xiao said with a chuckle on the starship, "There are still 2 great saint sects, right? With only 2 great saint sects left, all the great saint sects on the first mainland would be destroyed." Upon hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiaochen nodded expressionlessly. "Yes." He responded softly, which was considered as an answer to Yi Xiao's question. However, at this moment, Luo Li's message suddenly came. A voice transmission talisman cut through the void and directly entered Xiaochen's mind. Request collection, request monthly votes, request recommendation. Chapter 1691. Xiao Chen and the others' attack on the first mainland was going smoothly. At this moment, they received another message from Luo Li. When Xiao Chen regained his senses, Yi Xiao asked curiously, "What did he say?" Since Luo Li had sent a message, it was clear that there was a new order. Upon hearing this, Xiao Chen replied truthfully, "He wants us to retreat and return to the seventh realm immediately." There were only 2 great sage sects left on the first mainland. However, Luo Li actually wanted Xiao Chen and the others to retreat. Moreover, he wanted them to retreat immediately. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yi Xiao immediately cursed. "What? Retreat? Is there something wrong with his head? Why is he asking us to retreat at this time?" Yi Xiao directly said that Luo Li's head was caught by the door. Upon hearing this, Xiao Chen rolled his eyes at Yi Xiao. "You can go back and tell him yourself." Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yi Xiao smiled embarrassedly. What a joke! How could he say such words in front of Luo Li? Luo Li was an almighty celestial emperor. Upon seeing Luo Li's cowardice, Xiao Chen snapped. "All right, give the order to retreat." Although Xiao Chen didn't understand why Luo Li suddenly gave the order to retreat, he knew that there must be a reason. What Xiao Chen needed to do now was to act according to Luo Li's orders. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yi Xiao was slightly displeased. However, he still followed Xiao Chen's instructions and ordered the prodigies of the 2 realms to gather. In Luo Li's message, Xiao Chen and the others had to retreat from the first mainland within 3 days. Therefore, there wasn't much time left for Xiao Chen and the others. Due to the lack of time, Yi Xiao's orders specifically stated that everyone had to gather at the spaceship as soon as possible. They didn't have to collect the cultivation resources that had yet to be collected. They didn't even have to collect the cultivation resources. However, they had to gather as soon as possible and retreat from the first mainland. Upon receiving Yi Xiao's order, the prodigies of the 2 realms were equally confused. Why did he suddenly give the order to retreat? Everyone was puzzled, but they had no choice. Since Yi Xiao had given the order, they had no choice but to carry it out. The prodigies of the 8th realm didn't dare to disobey Yi Xiao's order, and the prodigies of the 7th realm were even more so. They didn't even need Xiao Chen's order. The prodigies of the 7th realm immediately rushed towards the spaceship. What a joke! They all knew Xiao Chen's temper. He was definitely someone who would kill anyone who disobeyed him. Therefore, none of the prodigies of the 7th realm dared to disobey Xiao Chen's order. The order to retreat had been given. Next, they just had to wait for the prodigies of the 2 realms to arrive. Then, they could retreat immediately. While Xiao Chen and the others were preparing to retreat, Luo Li and Hong Lian were sitting in the main hall of the 7th realm's Black Palace on the 7th mainland. Luo Li looked at Hong Lian and asked calmly, "Is the news accurate?" Upon hearing Luo Li's question, Hong Lian nodded and answered, "The news came from Old Man Yi himself. There shouldn't be any problems." There was naturally a reason why Luo Li suddenly ordered Xiao Chen and the others to retreat. It was because Hong Lian had received news that the will of the heavenly way from the second wilderness was preparing to reinforce the 7th wilderness. It was precisely because of the reinforcements from the second wilderness that Luo Li ordered Xiao Chen and the others to retreat from the first mainland as soon as possible. Otherwise, when the reinforcements from the second wilderness arrived, the situation would definitely change drastically. With the strength of the 7th and 8th realms, it would definitely be impossible for them to fight against the experts of the 3 wilderness at the same time. At that time, it would be very difficult for Xiao Chen and the others to retreat. It would be very dangerous. Old Man Yi had personally sent the news. The Old Man Yi that Hong Lian mentioned was the realm lord of the second Hachibara Senkai. Just like Luo Li and Hong Lian, he was also an immortal emperor. He was comparable to the will of the heavenly way. Since Old Man Yi had personally sent the news, there was naturally no need to doubt its authenticity. He secretly sighed in relief. They had finally lured the second wilderness over. With that, Luo Li and Hong Lian's mission to the 7th and 8th wilderness was completed. Now, it was up to the second and fourth wilderness to see if they could take down the second wilderness in the shortest amount of time. If they delayed for a few more days, once the reinforcements from the second wilderness arrived, Luoli and Honglian would have to prepare to retreat. After all, the seventh wilderness was not their real target. Since they had completed their mission, Luoli and Honglian would naturally not fight to the death with the experts of the three wilderness and increase their casualties. Then it's almost time to prepare for the evacuation, Rowley said after a slight hesitation. Honglian did not object to this. She nodded and said, "Once the little ones return, we can begin preparing." Luoli and Honglian had already begun preparing to retreat. However, the seventh will of the Heavenly Way and the eighth will of the Heavenly Way were completely unaware of this. At this time, in Haotian City, the two will of the Heavenly Way were also gathered together. The eighth will of the Heavenly Way said indifferently, "When will the second wilderness arrive?" "It won't take more than 10 days at the latest," the seventh barren will of the Heavenly Path said. Both of them knew that the second Baron's will of the Heavenly Path had come to support them, and they were relieved. With the second Baron's support, combined with the power of the three Barons, even if they couldn't wipe out the seventh realm and the eighth realm, they could still inflict serious damage to them. They were still waiting for the second will of the Heavenly Way to arrive and inflict heavy losses on the seventh and eighth wilderness. However, little did they know that Luoli and Honglian were already preparing to retreat. They had no intention of continuing to fight to the death with them. The seventh and eighth wilderness were both waiting for the second's help. Meanwhile, the seventh and eighth wilderness were secretly preparing to retreat. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, on the first continent, the prodigies of the two worlds finally arrived at the starship. Faced with the sudden order to retreat, someone asked Yi Xiao in confusion, "Why are we suddenly retreating? We are about to conquer the first continent." This prodigy did not understand Yi Xiao's sudden order to retreat. However, after hearing this, Yi Xiao immediately scolded, "You don't know." "I don't know either. This is an order from above. If you have any questions, go back and ask the Realm Lord. Don't bother me." After being scolded by Yi Xiao, this prodigy sensibly shut his mouth. Everyone had already returned to the starship. Immediately, Xiaochen gave the order to retreat. Immediately, the starship soared into the sky and quickly rushed into the clouds, leaving the first continent. Not only were the prodigies of the two worlds confused by the sudden retreat, but many warriors of the first continent were also confused. The situation was clearly in their favor. Why did the prodigies of the two worlds suddenly retreat? Please add, vote, recommend. Chapter 1692. Many cultivators on the first mainland were puzzled by the sudden retreat of Xiaochen and the others. The first mainland would have fallen if only the two great saint sects were left. But at this moment, Xiaochen and the others suddenly retreated. Although many people on the first mainland were relieved because of Xiaochen and the others' retreat, they were still afraid that this might be a conspiracy of the two worlds. Otherwise, why would Xiaochen and the others retreat at this time? Not only were the cultivators on the first mainland puzzled, but even Xiaochen and the others were also confused. Luoli suddenly gave the order to retreat. Everyone had no idea why, but since Luoli had given the order, they had no choice but to obey. The starship returned to the seventh mainland. A few days later, Xiaochen and the others finally arrived at the seventh mainland. Outside the seventh mainland, the will of the Heavenly Way of the seventh wilderness had also learned about the retreat of Xiaochen and the others. They had also sent people to intercept them, but Luoli was already prepared. Under the protection of the experts of the seventh realm, Xiaochen and the others safely returned to the Black Palace of the seventh realm. Now, the entire seventh mainland was basically divided into two. The two worlds occupied about 1/3 of the seventh mainland's area. Therefore, after returning to the Black Palace of the seventh realm, it meant that Xiaochen and the others were finally safe. The starship slowly landed on the main square of the Black Palace of the seventh realm. As soon as it arrived, Xiaochen, Yi Xiao, and Hong Xiu received a summons from Luoli and Honglian. Xiao Chen handed Luan Luan over to Yu Shujin and asked her to bring Luan Luan back to her cave residence. Then, the three of them came to the main hall of the Black Palace together. This time, it wasn't only Luoli and Honglian who were present. After Xiao Chen and the others arrived, there were already more than 20 people gathered in the main hall. These people were the experts of the 7th world and the 8th world. Their cultivation bases were at least at the Immortal Emperor realm. They could be considered as the true higher-ups of the two worlds. Of course, many of the people present were only projections. After all, many of them were still at the front line and could not leave easily. Therefore, this meeting could only be conducted through divine thought incarnations. However, this was not a big deal. After all, it was enough for the divine will incarnation to come. After glancing at the crowd, Xiao Chen and the other two went to their seats and sat down. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Luoli and Honglian, who were sitting in the main seats, spoke. "I've gathered all of you here today to inform you of the evacuation." Without beating around the bush, Luoli directly stated the purpose of this meeting. When they heard Luoli say that the two worlds were going to retreat, everyone looked at each other. After all, they didn't know that the Hachibara Senkai's real target was the 2nd wilderness, not the 7th wilderness. The outcome of the battle hadn't been decided yet. Besides, the two worlds weren't at a disadvantage, so why would they retreat all of a sudden? After such a long battle, they finally gained a foothold in the 7th wilderness. If they were to retreat now, wouldn't their previous efforts be in vain? Unable to understand why Luoli and Honglian would make such a decision, one of the 8th world's immortal emperors spoke first. "Sector Lord, why are we retreating all of a sudden? Wouldn't our previous efforts be in vain?" They couldn't understand. Upon seeing this, Luoli and Honglian didn't get angry. Instead, Luoli said softly with a smile. "It won't be in vain. On the contrary, we're retreating now because our mission is completed." Mission completed? Upon hearing Luoli's words, everyone was even more confused, including Xiao Chen and the other two. How could the mission be completed when the 7th wilderness hadn't been taken down? They had no idea what Luoli and Honglian meant. Shortly after, Luoli explained the Hachibara Senkai's entire plan to everyone. They learned that the Hachibara Senkai's real target wasn't the 7th wilderness. The alliance between the 7th and 8th worlds was only a feint. The Hachibara Senkai's real target was the 2nd wilderness. It was the mission of the 7th and 8th worlds to lure the will of the heavenly way from the 2nd wilderness to reinforce the 7th wilderness. Now that the 2nd wilderness had arrived to reinforce the 7th wilderness, their mission was completed. Next, it would depend on whether the 2nd and 4th realms could take down the 2nd wilderness in the shortest time possible. However, it shouldn't be a problem. After all, the 2nd wilderness will of the heavenly way was going to reinforce the 7th wilderness, which meant that most of the experts from the 2nd wilderness would be taken away. In this way, the defense of the 2nd wilderness would be slack. It wouldn't be too difficult to take down the defenseless 2nd wilderness by combining the forces of the two worlds. Everyone thought that the target was the 7th wilderness because they hadn't been told the whole plan. However, after hearing Luoli's words, everyone came back to their senses. If that was the case, it was the best time to retreat. Otherwise, it would be difficult to retreat once the 2nd wilderness arrived. Everyone regained their senses, and no one had any more objections. However, there was one person among the crowd who had a strange expression on his face, and that person was Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen didn't have any objections to Luoli and Honglian's plan, as well as the entire Hachibara Senkai. However, Xiao Chen had his own goal, which was to resurrect his family. If he retreated from the 7th wilderness, Xiao Chen would lose the opportunity to kill the will of the heavenly way. He wouldn't be able to take revenge or resurrect his family. Although Xiao Chen knew that he didn't have the ability to fight against the will of the heavenly way with his current strength, Xiao Chen didn't feel comfortable retreating just like that. He also knew that revenge was a dish best served cold. He didn't oppose Luoli and Honglian's decision, but Xiao Chen felt conflicted. Luoli seemed to have guessed Xiao Chen's thoughts. After telling everyone the plan, he said calmly, "All right, let's go. We'll evacuate in 3 days." be careful not to leak the news in advance. After saying what needed to be said, everyone cupped their hands in acknowledgement after hearing Luo Li's words. Then, their divine thought clones disappeared from the main hall. After the experts left, Xiao Chen and the other two also got up to leave. However, at this moment, Luo Li suddenly called out to Xiao Chen. "Xiao Chen, wait a moment." He gestured for Xiao Chen to stay. Seeing this, Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu glanced at Xiao Chen. The three of them looked at each other, and then the two of them stepped out of the main hall. They didn't know why Luo Li asked Xiao Chen to stay, but since Luo Li only asked Xiao Chen to stay, Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu could only leave first. Chapter 1693. After leaving Xiao Chen alone, only Luo Li, Hong Lian, and Xiao Chen were left in the hall. Luo Li looked at Xiao Chen and smiled. "Have a seat." He gestured for Xiao Chen not to be too restrained. Hearing this, Xiao Chen returned to his seat. Luo Li said, "I know what you're thinking, but with the current situation, it's impossible to swallow the entire seventh desolate in one go. Moreover, it's not easy to kill the will of the heavenly way. They represent the heavens and earth. Even I can't kill a will of the heavenly way." Luo Li had guessed Xiao Chen's thoughts and knew that Xiao Chen was reluctant to evacuate the seventh desolate. That was why he said this. If it were any other almighty immortal emperor, they probably wouldn't have said this to Xiao Chen. After all, immortal emperors were comparable to the will of the heavenly way. They didn't even fear the heavens and earth, so why would they care about other people's feelings? Luo Li said this to Xiao Chen because he didn't want Xiao Chen to be estranged from the seventh desolate realm. After hearing Luo Li's words, Xiao Chen nodded silently and didn't say anything. Luo Li knew it wasn't easy to make Xiao Chen let go. However, there was no other way. Luo Li slowly got up, walked down the stairs, and stood in front of Xiao Chen. His pitch-black eyes stared at Xiao Chen as though he wanted to suck Xiao Chen in. "Xiao Chen, you have to know that life will never be smooth sailing. Happiness, joy, sadness, pain, anger, everything you've experienced will form a part of your life. Of course, that includes hatred. I understand your hatred for the will of the heavenly way in the seventh desolate realm. If it were me, I would feel the same. However, people can't be immersed in hatred forever. You can remember it in your heart, but you can't let it be swallowed up by it. Life has to go on. Only when you've truly walked out of the shadow in your heart can you pursue a higher realm. Otherwise, the hatred in your heart will become your shackles, your inner demon. When that time comes, you won't even have the qualifications to go one step further, let alone take revenge. You're temporarily retreating now so that you can return in the future. When you're truly capable of taking revenge, when you're truly capable of reviving your family, that's when you'll return. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Luo Li didn't want Xiao Chen to live in hatred and pain. This wouldn't benefit Xiao Chen at all. Moreover, it wasn't easy to kill the will of the heavenly way. Earlier, Luo Li himself had said that even he couldn't kill the will of the world. He couldn't do that. Just like the foundation of the Hachibara Senkai, the first desolate realm. The Hachibara Senkai was born in the first desolate realm. However, after so many years, the Hachibara Senkai had only imprisoned the will of the heavenly way in the first desolate realm. They hadn't killed him. Was it because the Hachibara Senkai didn't want to kill the will of the heavenly way? Obviously not. After all, keeping the will of the heavenly way in the first desolate realm was tantamount to keeping a bomb that could explode at any time. The reason why they hadn't killed him was because the Hachibara Senkai didn't have the ability to kill the will of the heavenly way. In the entire eighth desolate realm, any will of the heavenly way could be said to be an immortal existence. Even though the Hachibara Senkai was powerful, they could only continuously whittle down the will of the heavenly way's power. Only when he was weakened to the extreme could they possibly kill him. The will of the heavenly way wasn't that easy to kill. Therefore, Luo Li didn't want Xiao Chen to be too impatient. There were many things that couldn't be helped by being impatient. If you didn't have the strength, what could you do even if you were impatient? Could you really kill the will of the heavenly way in the seventh desolate realm? Xiao Chen understood what Luo Li meant. he also knew that he was doing this for his own good. Taking a deep breath, Xiaochen nodded faintly and said, "Thank you, Realm Lord. I understand." Hearing Xiaochen's words, Luoli nodded with a smile and said, "Well, not bad. Then go and prepare. We'll evacuate in 3 days." As he spoke, Luoli gently patted Xiaochen's shoulder. Obviously, he was encouraging Xiaochen. He stood up and bowed respectfully to Luoli. To be honest, Luoli was really good to him. Not only did Luoli save his life, but even after he joined the 7th realm, Xiaochen was very grateful for Luoli's care. Xiaochen cupped his hands and was about to leave. However, before Xiaochen could take a few steps, Luoli's voice slowly came. "Xiaochen, remember, people only have hope when they're alive. No matter how difficult it is, it will eventually be realized one day. So, don't be stubborn and don't go to extremes. Live well, because you're the hope." Xiaochen wanted to take revenge and resurrect his family, but it was not easy. Not to mention Xiaochen, even Luoli didn't have this ability. Otherwise, Luoli would have already helped Xiaochen resurrect his family and kill the will of the heavenly way in the 7th desolate realm. If Luoli couldn't do it, Xiaochen still had a long way to go to achieve his wish. Hearing this, Xiaochen turned his head, but Luoli and Hong Lian's figures had already disappeared. Seeing this, Xiaochen was stunned for a moment, then he also stepped out of the main hall. After Luoli's explanation, Xiaochen really thought through a lot. That's right, people only have hope when they're alive. If they're dead, there's nothing left. His state of mind seemed to be a lot more cheerful, and his whole body was a lot more relaxed. Of course, this didn't mean that Xiaochen had forgotten his hatred, but it was deeply rooted in his heart. Before he had enough strength, Xiaochen wouldn't touch this unforgettable hatred. However, when Xiaochen had the strength to take revenge in the future, this hatred would erupt like a monstrous flood. Since he didn't have the strength, he couldn't live in hatred because not only would it not be beneficial, it would even harm him. After walking out of the main hall and looking at the 7th continent in the distance, Xiaochen took a deep breath and swore to himself, "Just you wait. I, Xiaochen, will return in 1 day. When that time comes, you'll die. The 7th desolation will be of the heavenly way." Xiaochen's state of mind had undergone some subtle changes, and he was no longer against the idea of leaving. However, before that, there was one more thing that Xiaochen needed to do, and that was the Wine Taoist. Although the Wine Taoist was used to life in the 7th realm and seemed to like it very much, Xiaochen wasn't sure if the Wine Taoist would agree to leave the 7th desolation with him. He had to find a way to persuade the Wine Taoist first. Xiaochen couldn't let the Wine Taoist stay. After all, with the current situation, the Wine Taoist would definitely not have a good ending if he stayed. Please add me to your collection, monthly vote, recommend me. Chapter 1694. Unlike Xiaosheng, Yinyangzi, and the others, the Wine Taoist could be said to have betrayed the 7th wilderness. Although the Wine Taoist had not expressed any intention of joining the Hachibara Senkai, the people of the 7th wilderness probably viewed him as a traitor after living in the 7th wilderness for so long. As such, if the Wine Taoist stayed in the 7th wilderness, he would most likely die. Therefore, Xiaochen could not let him stay. As for Xiaosheng, Yinyangzi, and the others, Xiaochen was not worried because their situation was completely different from the Wine Taoist. He believed that the 7th wilderness will of the heavenly way would not make things difficult for them. Xiaochen walked back to his cave. When he returned, he saw Hong Xiu, Yi Xiao, and Yu Shujin. Luan Luan was naturally the first to rush over when she saw Xiaochen. She was too clingy to Xiaochen. As long as she did not see Xiaochen, she would become restless. Xiaochen picked up Luan Luan and walked to the pavilion in the courtyard. Hong Xiu said with some jealousy, "You're such a good daughter. She doesn't listen to anyone and only wants to see you." Xiaochen did not say anything. He sat down with Luan Luan in his arms. Luan Luan was clearly satisfied when Xiaochen hugged her. They did not ask what Luoli and Xiaochen talked about. Hong Xiu and Yi Xiao were not gossipy people. Xiaochen told Yu Shujin about the evacuation and let him arrange it himself. Yu Shujin was indeed a good helper. At least with him, Xiaochen could relax. No matter what happened, he just needed to leave it to Yu Shujin. Xiaochen did not need to worry at all. When Yu Shujin heard that they would have to leave in 3 days, he was stunned at first. However, after Xiaochen's explanation, he quickly understood the situation and stood up to leave. After Yu Shujin left, Xiaochen asked the maidservant by his side about the wine Taoist's recent situation. After learning that there was nothing special, Xiaochen decided to have a chat with the wine Taoist. In order to leave the 7th wilderness, the only troublesome thing was to convince the wine Taoist. If the wine Taoist was unwilling, Xiaochen could not do anything about it. However, if it really came to that, Xiaochen would probably take the wine Taoist away by force. He would not leave the wine Taoist alone to die. After coaxing Wang to sleep, it was already late at night. Only then did Xiaochen arrive at wine Taoist's courtyard. As soon as he entered, Xiaochen saw the wine Taoist drinking alone. According to the maidservant, the wine Taoist had been drinking all this time. Moreover, Li Qiu would occasionally accompany him for a drink or two. He did not do anything special. When he saw Xiaochen walk over, the wine Taoist smiled and said, "You're back?" "Yes." When he heard the wine Taoist's words, Xiaochen nodded. He then sat down in front of the wine Taoist and poured himself a cup of wine. As they drank with the wine Taoist, they did not talk much. As they chatted, Xiaochen said calmly, "The 2 realms are going to leave the 7th wilderness." He told the wine Taoist that the 2 realms were preparing to leave the 7th wilderness. When he heard Xiaochen's words, the wine Taoist was obviously stunned. He then took a sip of wine and said, "You want me to leave with you?" As Xiaochen's master, the wine Taoist could naturally guess what Xiaochen was thinking. When he heard the wine Taoist, Xiaochen did not intend to hide it. He nodded and admitted it directly. He came to find the wine Taoist tonight to persuade him to leave with him. Therefore, Xiaochen had nothing to hide. Seeing this, the wine Taoist fell silent. Just as Xiaochen thought, the wine Taoist had gradually gotten used to life in the 7th realm. He also felt that the 7th realm was not bad. At least, it was completely different from what he had heard before. However, the wine Taoist was hesitant to leave the 7th wilderness with the 7th realm. After all, many things could not be changed so easily. It could be said that he had been loyal to the 7th wilderness for his entire life. Now that he was suddenly asked to leave, he naturally hesitated. Seeing the wine Taoist hesitate, Xiaochen did not say anything. He quietly drank his wine and let the wine Taoist think by himself. Xiaochen believed that the wine Taoist knew what would happen if he stayed. Of course, this did not rule out the possibility that the wine Taoist wanted to die to prove his loyalty to the 7th wilderness. However, if the wine Taoist really had such thoughts, Xiaochen would definitely not agree. It would depend on the wine Taoist's choice. For over an hour, the 2 of them did not say a word. In the end, the wine Taoist spoke first. "If I stay, I'll definitely be executed as a traitor, right?" "Yes." Xiaochen nodded. "If I don't leave, you'll forcefully take me away, right?" The wine Taoist continued. "Yes." Xiaochen continued nodding. Before coming, Xiaochen had already made up his mind. If the wine Taoist was willing to leave with him, that would be the best. However, if the wine Taoist did not agree, then there was nothing he could do. Even if he had to use force, Xiaochen would forcefully take the wine Taoist away. There was no doubt that Xiaochen did not have the ability to do so. As the heir of the 7th realm, Xiaochen could forcefully take the wine Taoist away with just a word. Seeing that Xiaochen had made up his mind to take him away, the wine Taoist revealed a complicated smile. He took a sip of wine and said, "Will I have a chance to come back in this life?" No matter what, the 7th wilderness was the wine Taoist's hometown. Now that he was about to leave, the wine Taoist naturally did not want to leave. Hearing this, Xiaochen nodded without hesitation. "I will definitely come back." He would definitely come back, for no other reason than the fact that he had yet to take revenge. Thus, one day, Xiaochen would definitely return to the seventh wilderness. Hearing Xiaochen's words, the wine Taoist took a deep look at Xiaochen. He knew what Xiaochen meant. In fact, during his time in the seventh realm, the wine Taoist had also carefully sorted out the entire matter. He also realized that according to the seventh wilderness's will of the heavenly way, the entire matter was full of loopholes. The first was the motive. Everyone knew that Xiaochen loved his 4 wives very much. They also knew that Xiaochen was very filial to his parents. Otherwise, he would not have brought his parents with him all the time. Would such a person kill his own wives and parents? Moreover, what good would it do Xiaochen to kill them? What would Xiaochen gain? He had no motive to kill them at all. Thus, the wine Taoist's heart was actually starting to lean towards Xiaochen. After a moment of silence, the wine Taoist finally chuckled softly. Forget it. I'm just a bag of old bones. It doesn't matter where I go. Moreover, I don't seem to have the right to choose. Chapter 1695. In the end, the wine Taoist agreed to leave with Xiaochen. Hearing that, Xiaochen let out a sigh of relief. The wine Taoist's agreement was the best outcome. Xiaochen raised his cup and clinked it with the wine Taoist. He seemed calm as he said, "Master, thank you for believing in me." With that, Xiaochen stood up and left. The wine Taoist had agreed to leave the seventh wilderness with him. Xiaochen knew that the wine Taoist believed in him. If the wine Taoist still believed in the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way and did not believe in him, then he definitely would not have agreed to leave with him. Now that the wine Taoist had chosen to leave with him, it meant that the wine Taoist believed in him. It felt good to be trusted by someone. At the very least, Xiaochen knew that there were still people in this world who believed in him. After leaving the wine Taoist's courtyard, Xiaochen looked at the stars in the sky and suddenly thought of Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing. He murmured, "Big brother, second sister, one day you'll believe in me too." The wine Taoist had already believed in him. This gave Xiaochen an indescribable feeling. Perhaps this was what it felt like to be trusted by someone. He firmly believed that one day, Xian Yuanling and Wang Qing would see the true face of the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way and believe in him. Xiaochen breathed a sigh of relief after dealing with the wine Taoist's problem perfectly. At the same time, the wine Taoist stood up after Xiaochen left and looked at the night sky as well. The wine Taoist muttered softly. He murmured, "Heavenly way, I'm still willing to believe in my disciple." The wine Taoist seemed to be saying this to himself, but it also seemed like he was drawing a line between himself and the seventh wilderness will of the heavenly way. The next few days, the two worlds were busy preparing for the evacuation. Of course, everything was done in secret. The cultivators of the seventh wilderness and the eighth wilderness didn't know about it. Many experts from the two worlds returned to the seventh world's Black Palace one after another. There were not many people guarding the front line that had once confronted the two desolates. However, the experts from the two desolates did not know about this. Who would have thought that Luo Li and Hong Lian would choose to retreat at this time? Perhaps even the seventh and eighth wilds will of the heavenly way did not expect this. The evacuation was carried out in an orderly manner. During these days, Xiaochen was very relaxed. Every day, other than cultivating by himself, he was supervising Luan's cultivation. However, Luan's cultivation was really a headache. Every day, he only asked her to cultivate for an hour, but she still tried to find a way to hide as much as possible. This made Xiaochen a little speechless. Moreover, perhaps because she was gradually getting used to the environment of the seventh world, and because Xiaochen was by her side, Luan's mischievous character slowly emerged. She was very naughty. Of course, this was not toward Xiaochen. In front of Xiaochen, Luan always looked like an obedient child. However, as long as Xiaochen was not around, this little girl would start acting up. This caused Xiaochen's maids to have a headache, but they couldn't get angry. It couldn't be helped. Luan was really too cute. When she acted like a spoiled child, she could melt people's hearts. Luan Luan was an extremely adorable little witch. That was almost all of Xiao Chen's maid's comments about her. However, it was strange that Wine Taoist liked Luan Luan very much. Perhaps it was because he loved the house and its crow. Luan Luan was Xiao Chen's daughter, so Wine Taoist really treated Luan Luan as his own granddaughter. It could be said that the old man was very obedient to Luan Luan. Under Wine Taoist's care, Luan Luan quickly accepted him. Of course, the main reason was because of the relationship between Xiao Chen and Wine Taoist. Although Luan Luan was young, she was very smart. She could feel that Xiao Chen respected Wine Taoist from the bottom of his heart. Wine Taoist was a very important person to her father, so Luan Luan had to treat him well. This was the little girl's idea. On this day, Xiao Chen watched Luan Luan cultivate for an hour as usual. When the time was up, the little girl ran away. Looking at the direction she went, she should have lost sight of Wine Taoist. Seeing this, Xiao Chen helplessly smiled bitterly. Then, he ignored her and continued to cultivate. In terms of talent, Xiao Chen was definitely not as good as Luan Luan. The little girl only cultivated for an hour every day. However, in just a few days, her cultivation had already broken through to the mysterious Ian initial realm. This kind of breakthrough speed was simply unheard of. Xiao Chen even suspected that if Luan Luan worked harder, based on her current cultivation realm, it would not be impossible for her to break through to the next realm in a day. Unfortunately, the little girl was too mischievous. She had no desire to cultivate at all. However, with the necklace on Luan Luan, the remnant souls of Qin Shuru and the others had recovered a little. This was the thing that made Xiao Chen most excited. The little girl, Luan Luan, had indeed recovered the power of her remnant soul. This made Xiao Chen's hope of reviving his family even greater. In this way, 3 days passed in a flash. On the morning of the 4th day, everyone in the 7th realm and the 8th realm had prepared to evacuate. The experts of the 2 realms at the front line had all retreated to the 7th realm's Black Palace. At this time, the 7th and the 8th Wasteland will of the Heavenly Way finally noticed the actions of the 2 realms. At this time, in Haotian City, the 2 will of the Heavenly Way gathered together. The 8th Wasteland will of the Heavenly Way said with a puzzled expression. Everyone has retreated? What does this mean? They had received news that the experts of the 2 realms at the front line had all retreated to the 7th realm's Black Palace. They did not understand what the 2 realms wanted to do. Hearing the 8th Wasteland will of the Heavenly Way's confusion, the 7th will of the Heavenly Way also frowned. He also did not understand the purpose of the 2 realms. After pondering for a few moments, the 7th will of the Heavenly Way finally muttered to himself. When will the 2nd Wasteland arrive? By tonight at the latest, the 8th will of the Heavenly Way replied. The 2nd will of the Heavenly Way and the experts of the 2nd Wasteland would arrive at the 7th Wasteland today. Upon hearing this, the 7th will of the Heavenly Way had a bad premonition. After a few moments, he suddenly yelled. Oh no, at this moment, the 7th Wasteland's will of the heavens will finally realize something. However, it was clearly a little too late. The 2nd will of the Heavenly Way was about to arrive at the 7th Wasteland. It was obviously too late for him to return and reinforce the 2nd Wasteland. Besides, it was estimated that the experts of the 2nd and 4th realms had already launched their attacks on the 2nd Wasteland. The 7th and 8th realms were also prepared to evacuate. In terms of time, it was completely too late to stop them. Please add, vote, recommend. Chapter 1696. The 7th Wastelands will of the Heavenly Path shouted coldly, pass down my order. Stop the 7th world and the 8th world at all costs. We can't let them leave the 7th Wasteland successfully. If the Hachibara Senkai's true goal was the 2nd Wastelands, then it was impossible for them to save the 2nd Wastelands. If that was the case, the 7th will of the Heavenly Way could only settle for the next best thing, which was to heavily injure the 7th and 8th worlds to make up for the losses they suffered. If they could heavily injure the 7th and 8th worlds by gathering the power of the 3 wastelands, then it would be acceptable. As the seventh will of the heavenly way spoke, the experts of the two wastelands quickly rushed towards the seventh world's black palace. At the same time, the seventh will of the heavenly way and the eighth will of the heavenly way personally took action as well. However, when they arrived at the gate of the immortal domain where the seventh world's black palace was, it was nowhere to be seen. At the same time, the two wastelands had disappeared as well. They were still too late. In the end, they were unable to stop the experts of the seventh and eighth worlds. The seventh wasteland's will of the Great Path immediately sent a message to the second wasteland's will of the Great Path, asking where he was. Very quickly, the second wasteland's will of the Great Path replied that he was in the seventh wasteland. After learning that the second will of the heavenly way had entered the seventh wastelands, the seventh will of the heavenly way fell into complete despair. It was too late for them to go back and help the second wastelands. However, based on the current situation, if they guessed correctly, the second wastelands would not be able to protect themselves. After all, the Hachibara Senkai would take over. If that happened, the Hachibara Senkai would occupy two of the seven wastelands. The first and second wastelands would both fall into the hands of the Hachibara Senkai. With that, the Hachibara Senkai would become even stronger. They had been deceived. They had been completely deceived. From the very beginning, the seventh and eighth worlds had only been feints. Their real target was not the seventh wastelands. The two worlds seemed aggressive, but it was just an act. They had no intention of taking over the seventh wastelands. Their real target was the second wastelands. He understood everything, but it was too late. However, even though he knew there was no chance, the seventh cultivator of the Great Path still told the second cultivator of the Great Path to return to the second cultivator of the Great Path. At the same time, he would lead the seventh cultivator of the Great Path to the second cultivator of the Great Path. It was said that the eight desolation immoral world's true target was the second desolation. At this moment, a huge starship was rapidly transmitting information. An old man stood on the deck with a gloomy face. He was the second desolation's will of the heavenly path. After receiving the message from the will of the heavenly way of the seventh will of the heavenly way, he had ordered them to return to the second wastelands. However, according to the seventh will of the heavenly way of the seventh wastelands, it was already too late to rescue the second wastelands. This was indeed the case. Just as the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands was rushing back, the fourth realm and the second realm had joined forces to attack the second wastelands. Without the protection of the will of the heavenly way and most of the experts, the second wastelands had no power to fight back. In just 3 days, the two worlds had successfully taken over the second wastelands. In order to take over the second wastelands, the Hachibara Senkai had made all the necessary preparations. After taking over the second wastelands, the two worlds had set up a super formation in the second wastelands. Just like the seventh wastelands, this formation enveloped the entire second wastelands. There was only one entrance and exit. In this way, even if the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands returned, it would be impossible for him to enter the second wastelands unless he could break through the defenses of the second and fourth realms. In the blink of an eye, the second wastelands was taken down. Of course, the matter of the second wastelands had little to do with Xiaochen and the others. After all, this was a matter of the second and fourth realms, and the mission of the seventh and eighth realms had long been completed. After a few more days, the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands finally led his people back to the second wastelands. However, it could be said that the second wastelands had fallen as expected. Moreover, the formation drawn by the two realms in the second wastelands had been completely formed. The will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands had no way of leading people into the second wastelands. The only entrance was guarded by many experts from the two realms. The furious second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way naturally led his people to fight fiercely with the experts from the second and fourth realms. Yi Xian, you despicable person! In the starry sky, the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way and the two realm masters stood in the air. Looking at a handsome middle-aged man, the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way coldly shouted. Yi Xian was the realm master of the second realm. He was also an old opponent of the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands. Just like Luo Li and the will of the heavenly way of the seventh wastelands, the two of them had been fighting for countless years. From the beginning to the end, it could be said that they were evenly matched. However, this time, Yi Xian directly copied the home of the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands. This caused the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands to burn with anger. Hearing the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands, Yi Xian lightly smiled and said, "You're stupid, yet you call me an idiot? Ridiculous. Both sides were enemies to begin with, so how could they be despicable? It was normal for them to do anything to achieve their goals. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way for being too stupid. If he didn't bring people to support the seventh wastelands, how could Yi Xian and the others have such a good opportunity?" Hearing Yi Xian's words, the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way gnashed his teeth in anger. Seeing this, a white-haired old man beside Yi Xian indifferently said, "Why are you talking so much to him? Let's do it." This old man was the realm master of the fourth realm of the Hachibara Senkai. His name was Qing Yun, and the fourth realm had contributed greatly to taking down the second wastelands. Hearing Qing Yun's words, Yi Xian shrugged his shoulders and didn't refuse. Following which, the two of them attacked the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way. Facing two immortal emperors at the same time, the pressure on the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way could be imagined. Even though his heart was filled with rage, after a fierce battle, the second wastelands of the will of the heavenly way was still no match for the two of them. In the end, they could only choose to retreat. He hurriedly rushed back, but in front of the experts of the two realms, the second wastelands was ultimately defeated. Not only was he unable to take back the second wastelands, he even paid a heavy price. At this moment, the second wastelands had already fallen into the hands of the Hachibara Senkai. It would not be easy to take it back. However, the will of the heavenly way of the second wastelands was obviously unwilling to give up. He only retreated, but did not leave. Instead, he waited for the arrival of the seventh wastelands of the will of the heavenly way. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1697. The second desolate will of the heavenly way wanted to take back the second desolate land, but unfortunately, by the time he rushed back, everything was already over. The entire second desolate land had already fallen into the hands of the Hachibara Senkai. Moreover, after a great battle, the second desolate will of the heavenly way wasn't able to gain any advantage from Yi Xian and Qing Yun. In fact, he even suffered a huge loss. It was obviously impossible for him to fight against two Hachibara Senkai realm lords at the same time, even if it was the will of the heavenly way. However, the will of the heavenly Tao didn't leave. Even though the second desolation was occupied by the eighth desolation immortal world, the will of the heavenly Tao wasn't willing to give up so easily. He had to take it back no matter what. Inside the huge starship, the second desolate will of the heavenly way sat in the main hall. Beside him was an old man at the great circle of the immortal emperor realm. This old man was an expert from the second desolate land, and also the person that the will of the heavenly way trusted the most. Looking at the second desolate land, the old man said with a serious expression, "Heavenly Tao, what should we do now? The Hachibara Senkai has already drawn a talisman formation in the second desolate land, so we are unable to enter." The current situation of the second desolate land was very similar to the seventh desolate land. The entire second desolate land was enveloped by a talisman formation, and there was only one entrance and exit. However, this only entrance and exit was obviously firmly blocked by the Hachibara Senkai. Therefore, if they wanted to take back the second desolate land, they could only attack head-on. However, the second desolate will of the heavenly way had already led people to try it out. The effect of a head-on attack was minimal, and there was no chance of breaking through. Hearing the old man's words, the second desolate will of the heavenly way's face darkened. After a moment of silence, he fiercely gritted his teeth and said, The second desolate land has already fallen into the hands of the Hachibara Senkai. No matter what, I cannot let the Hachibara Senkai succeed in my second desolate land. No matter what price I have to pay, I swear to take back the second desolate land. As he spoke, the second desolate will of the heavenly way took out several sound transmission talismans. Then, in front of the old man, he left a message in the sound transmission talisman and directly used it. These sound transmission talismans, the second will of the heavenly way, was really used to contact the other will of the heavenly way of the heavenly way. Now that the second desolate land had been occupied by the Hachibara Senkai, the second will of the heavenly way of the heavenly way vowed to take back the second desolate land. As such, they could only ask for help from the other will of the heavenly way of the heavenly way. Except for the will of the heavenly way of the first desolate, who was already imprisoned, the other 6 will of the heavenly way of the heavenly way all received a message from the second desolate. After receiving the message from the second will of the heavenly way of the Hachibara Senkai, the other 6 will of the heavenly way of the Hachibara Senkai did not hesitate at all and immediately prepared to support the second desolate. The 8 desolations and the Hachibara Senkai were destined to be like fire and water from the day of their birth. Therefore, the Hachibara Senkai's will of the heavenly way of the 8 desolations were naturally united against the external enemy. Just like the sector lords of the Hachibara Senkai, they all had a common enemy. All the will of the heavenly way of the 8 desolations gathered in the second desolate land and gathered the strength of the entire 8 desolations to take back the second desolate land. They could not let the second desolate land in the hands of the Hachibara Senkai. Following the message from the second desolate will of the heavenly way, all the will of the heavenly way of the 8 desolations began to move. They all looked like they were supporting the second desolate land. Of course, amongst the will of the heavenly way, the ones who moved the fastest were naturally the 7th and 8th desolations. They had originally planned to support the second desolate land, but now that they had received the request for help from the second desolate land, the will of the heavenly way of the 7th desolate land and the 8th will of the heavenly way of the 8th desolate land immediately led the experts of the 2 desolate lands to the second desolate land. Such a huge commotion from the will of the heavenly way naturally could not be hidden from the Hachibara Senkai. At this time, at the entrance of the second desolate land, a golden palace floated in the air. This was the temporary stronghold of the second and fourth realms. At this moment, Yi Xian and Qing Yun were sitting opposite each other in the main hall of the golden palace. Just now, the two of them had received news from the realm masters of the other realms about the will of the heavenly way. Yi Xian smiled as he looked at Qing Yun. Looks like the second desolate land is determined to fight an unprecedented battle. The strange movements of the will of the heavenly way had already proven everything. From the looks of it, they were all rushing towards the second desolate land. And all the will of the heavenly way of the 8 desolations were gathered together. This was indeed an unprecedented battle. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Qing Yun's expression didn't change in the slightest. He only lightly said, "If he wants to fight, then let's fight. Send a message to the others." The second desolate land had gathered everyone from the will of the heavenly way to take back the second desolate land. As a result, Yi Xian and Qing Yun could only gather the power of the Hachibara Senkai to resist. He asked for help from the other realm masters and gathered all the power of the Hachibara Senkai to resist the counterattack of the second desolate land. Hearing Qing Yun's words, Yi Xian smiled and said, "There's no need for you to say anything. I've already sent out the news." Yi Xian had already sent out the request for help a long time ago. This time, the forces of the 8 desolations and the Hachibara Senkai had gathered in the second desolate land. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this was the first time the two sides had started an all-out war. All the will of the heavenly way, as well as all the realm masters, were gathered in the second desolate land. This was the first time such a flourishing age had appeared. Since the birth of the 8 desolation immortal realm, the two sides had never stopped fighting. However, due to various reasons, the war between the 8 desolation immortal realm and the 8 desolation immortal realm was basically a war between the two realms. However, this time, with the request for help from the second desolate land's will of the heavenly way, the will of the heavenly way of the 8 desolations would definitely gather in the second desolate land. At the same time, the realm masters of the Hachibara Senkai were the same. The strength of both sides had gathered. This was the first time that such a great battle had erupted between the Hachibara Senkai and the 8 desolations. The news had already spread. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Qingyan lightly nodded and didn't say anything. Yi Xian, on the other hand, had a light smile on his face as he spoke. Looks like the second desolate land is really going to be lively. However, I haven't seen those old fellows for a long time. When they come, I must have a good drink. The old fellows that Yi Xian mentioned were the realm masters of the other realms. Hearing this, Qingyan snappily said, I won't drink you to death. Hearing Qingyan's words, Yi Xian immediately laughed out loud. Ha, there's a golden house in the wine, and there's a jade in the wine. Then there's a golden house in the book, illiterate. Hearing this, Qingyan disdainfully said. Just as Yi Xian was laughing loudly, on the other side, Luoli and Red Lotus, who had evacuated from the 7th wasteland, also received a message from Yi Xian. Knowing that the second desolate will of the heavenly way wanted to gather the strength of the entire 8 desolations to take back the second desolate land, Luoli said with a faint smile on his face. Looks like it's going to be lively this time. Then what do you plan to do? Hearing Luoli's words, Red Lotus, who was at the side, smiled charmingly. Of course it was lively. This was the first time that so many experts from the 8 desolations and Hachibara Senkai had gathered together. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1698. All the experts from 8 desolates and Hachibara Senkai had gathered together. It was a lively scene. Moreover, if the battle were to start, it would definitely be the largest battle in 8 desolates. Luoli chuckled when he heard Honglian's words. What else can we do? Of course, we have to go. All the will of the heavenly way in 8 desolates had already rushed to the second desolates. As the sector lords of Hachibara Senkai, Luoli and Honglian naturally could not be absent. Without much hesitation, the 7th World's Black Palace changed its direction and headed to the second desolates. Luoli and Honglian led the experts from both worlds to the second desolates. At the same time, in the endless starry sky of 8 desolates, there were many starships and palaces that were rushing to the second desolates. In an instant, the second desolates had become the center of 8 desolates' world. Countless experts gathered there. In Xiao Chen's cave, the news of the second desolates had spread in just one day. At this moment, Hong Xiu, Yi Xiao, and Xiao Chen were sitting in a pavilion in the courtyard. As for Luan Luan, she was playing alone in the courtyard. Yi Xiao's eyes were filled with excitement. He looked at the two of them and said excitedly, the scale of the battle this time is unprecedented. Almost all the experts from Hachibara Senkai and 8 desolates will participate in the battle. Yi Xiao knew that Hachibara Senkai and 8 desolates would gather all their forces to fight outside the second desolates. He was naturally excited about it. After all, this was the first time in the history of 8 desolates' world that a battle of this scale had erupted. Compared to Yi Xiao's excitement, Xiao Chen and Hong Xiu were much calmer. Hong Xiu curled her lips and said disdainfully, "Why are you, an immortal realm cultivator, so excited? You speak as if you were the sector lord." Yi Xiao did not take Hong Xiu's disdain to heart. The excitement in his eyes did not diminish at all. But soon, Yi Xiao seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Xiao Chen and said, "Brother Xiao Chen, the Hachibara Senkai will gather this time. Don't cause any trouble, especially the other freaks. It's best if you don't clash with them." The freaks that Yi Xiao mentioned were the heirs of the other realms. Yi Xiao knew Xiao Chen's temper very well. Although he felt that Xiao Chen's personality had changed recently, at least he was not as cold as before. His personality of killing people on a whim had not changed. Therefore, Yi Xiao was afraid. Given Xiao Chen's personality, would he draw his sword and kill the heirs of the other realms when he saw them? If that was the case, things would not end well. After all, those who could become heirs of the realms were not ordinary people. Moreover, the heirs of the Hachibara Senkai all had very strange tempers. Seeing that Xiaochen did not seem to listen to him at all, Yi Xiao advised him earnestly. He kept telling Xiaochen that the heirs of the other realms were all crazy and that it was best not to provoke them. However, in the face of Yi Xiao's advice and reminder, Hongxiu chuckled and said, "I think that the two of you are the weirdest of the heirs of the Hachibara Senkai. How dare you say that their personalities are weird?" Yi Xiao kept saying that the heirs of the other realms were all crazy and had strange personalities. However, in Hongxiu's opinion, Xiaochen and Yi Xiao's personalities were not much better. Therefore, she did not want to talk about the two brothers. Thinking about it, Xiaochen and Yi Xiao, one would draw his sword and kill people on a whim without caring about the consequences. He was a complete lunatic who did not care about the consequences. The other was purely a pretentious prick. When these two weirdos gathered together, Yi Xiao even warned Xiaochen not to provoke the heirs of the other realms. What a joke! In Hongxiu's opinion, the heirs of the other realms should be careful and not provoke these two weirdos. Otherwise, if Yi Xiao pretended to be pretentious and Xiaochen killed people, things would be troublesome. Hearing Hongxiu's words, Yi Xiao smiled embarrassedly. It seemed to make sense. Xiaochen, on the other hand, took a sip of wine and said, "I won't provoke others." Hearing this, Yi Xiao gave a look that said, "I don't believe you. Xiaochen won't provoke others?" No one would believe that. Just look at how many times Xiaochen had wanted to draw his sword and kill people in the seventh realm. He had even killed people a few times. He did not care about the rules of the seventh realm at all. Looking at Xiaochen and Yi Xiao, Hongxiu suddenly had a premonition that this trip to the second wilderness would not be peaceful. Not to mention the war between the Hachibara Senkai and the eighth wilderness, these two weirdos and the other heirs would not get along peacefully. Those who could become heirs were the cream of the crop, the cream of the crop. Usually, no one would see them, so naturally, they would get along peacefully. But this time, because of the war in the second wilderness, the Hachibara Senkai had gathered together. Xiaochen and the other heirs would naturally meet again. However, these heirs were all arrogant. It would be strange if they could get along peacefully. It should be known that the heirs of the Hachibara Senkai were each more arrogant than the other. Xiaochen's arrogance was ingrained in his bones. Although he did not show it usually, Hongxiu knew very well that Xiaochen's arrogance was no less than the others. As for Yi Xiao, although he laughed and joked around with Xiaochen and the others, he was also very proud. This could be seen from how Yi Xiao treated others. In the seventh realm, who would Yi Xiao laugh and joke around with? He would only do this when facing Xiaochen and Hongxiu. As the saying goes, two tigers cannot live on the same mountain. Usually, the heirs of the Hachibara Senkai would not meet each other. But this time, it would be very exciting. After all, as the top of the younger generation in their respective realms, no one wanted to be suppressed by the other. So, it was inevitable that there would be sparks. She could not help but look forward to Xiaochen and the other heirs meeting. But thinking of this, Hongxiu suddenly remembered something. A glint of coldness flashed across her eyes. Her originally happy mood quickly sank. She looked at Yi Xiao and asked coldly, "Will he come?" Xiaochen did not know who Hongxiu was talking about, but Yi Xiao obviously knew. Hearing this, Yi Xiao's expression changed slightly. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, "I'm not sure. But I don't think so. The first realm master can't leave because he has to suppress the will of the heavenly way in the first wilderness. I don't think he will come. Please add, vote, recommend." Chapter 1699. He didn't know who they were talking about, but Xiaochen could clearly feel that when they talked about him, Hongxiu's face became a little unnatural, and even a little ugly. Her eyes were complicated. There was hatred, disdain, and even a trace of fear. Hongxiu seemed to be very afraid of the person she was talking about. Xiaochen didn't know, but he didn't ask too much. These things had nothing to do with him, so Xiaochen didn't want to pay too much attention to them. Perhaps they realized that Xiaochen was still on the side, so Hongxiu and Yishao quickly changed the topic. In the next few days, everyone rushed to the second desolate realm. Xiaochen spent these days very peacefully. He was almost immersed in cultivation every day. In addition, Wine Taoist seemed to be getting more and more accustomed to life in the seventh realm. Since leaving the seventh desolate realm, perhaps the shackles in his heart were finally unlocked. Even though he didn't express his intention to join the seventh realm, Wine Taoist had made many friends in the seventh realm. No, it should be called drinking friends. He was no longer like before. After leaving the seventh realm, Wine Taoist also participated in several banquets under the invitation of Li Qiu and the others. This trip was simply unstoppable. The people in the seventh realm had always been forthright in drinking, and this was just like Wine Taoist's temper. Gradually, the number of drinking friends around Wine Taoist increased. In the past few days, Wine Taoist had been drinking with Li Qiu and the others almost every day. Xiaochen saw the changes in Wine Taoist and was secretly happy, so he naturally didn't stop him. Moreover, Li Qiu and the others never deliberately alienated Wine Taoist because he used to be from the seventh desolate realm, or because he hadn't joined the seventh realm yet. This was the best. Wine Taoist gradually unlocked the shackles in his heart, which Xiaochen was happy to see. After 5 days of rushing, Xiaochen finally arrived at the second desolate realm. At this time, at the entrance of the second desolate realm, the golden palace was still floating, but on this day, from the starry sky all around, powerful auras suddenly appeared. Needless to say, the appearance of these auras naturally meant that the experts of the other realms had arrived. Within the great hall, Yi Xian and Qin Yin felt these auras. Yi Xian was the first to stand up and laugh. This old thing is finally here. After waiting for so many days, the experts from the other realms finally arrived. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Qin Yin lightly said, "Let's go. The two of us should show ourselves to welcome them. How troublesome. We've been friends for so many years. Why do you still have to be so formal?" Hearing this, Yi Xian unwillingly muttered in a low voice. However, his body still followed Qin Yin out of the hall. Streaks of terrifying auras passed by quickly. Then, the crowd saw palaces and starships of various shapes slowly cutting through the starry sky and landing beside the golden palace. The first to appear was a silver-white palace. From within, a handsome young man rose into the air. When he saw Yi Xian and Qin Yin in the sky above the golden palace, the handsome young man smiled as he spoke. "You two old fellows haven't seen each other for so many years, yet you're still alive. Tui, you old pervert. You're already so old, yet you still want to pretend to be a young man. You don't want to be ashamed. Moreover, you're fine, so how can the two of us die?" Hearing this, Yi Xian snappily said. Facing Yi Xian's ridicule, the young man didn't get angry. He took a step forward in the air and instantly appeared in front of Yi Xian and Qin Yin. Seeing the appearance of this young man, many of the young geniuses from the second and fourth realms started whispering to each other, wanting to know the identity of this person. After that, an older generation expert from the fourth realm told everyone. "Shoo, lower your voices. This is the realm master of the third realm, Lord Ning Su." The young man was the realm lord of the third realm. His name was Ning Su. Not long after Ning Su appeared, a starship crudely appeared on the main plaza of the Golden Palace. Then, a deep voice of anger could be heard. "You piece of trash, don't you know that I'm cultivating? It's so bumpy, how do you want me to cultivate?" As he cursed, a brawny man nearly 3 meters tall walked out of the starship. He originally had an angry expression on his face, but when he saw Yi Xian, Ning Su, and Qin Yin, the brawny man immediately put on a smile. The speed at which he changed his expression was simply speechless. "Ha, you three old fellows, if you don't get drunk tonight, no one is allowed to run." Not only did the burly man have a rough appearance, even his voice was like thunder, causing one's eardrums to hurt. Looking at this burly man, some of the older generation experts quickly spoke to the many young geniuses beside them. This is the realm master of the fifth realm, Lord Yuaochuan. Remember, you absolutely cannot offend this person. Among the 8 realm masters of the Hachibara Senkai, this lord is famous for being temperamental. Yuaochuan was a temperamental person. Hearing this, the surrounding young geniuses all nodded in agreement. He was indeed temperamental. Following the appearance of Yuaochuan, the crowd didn't have to wait for long before a starship and the Black Palace of the 7th realm appeared in their line of sight. Then, Luoli and Red Lotus rose into the air from the Black Palace. At the same time, a middle-aged man who looked like a farmer appeared in front of everyone from the starship. The middle-aged man who appeared from the starship didn't look like an expert at all. There were many places on his body that were stained with mud, and his pants were rolled up to his knees. He was also wearing a pair of straw sandals, and the most outrageous thing was that he was carrying a straw hat on his back. He was a typical farmer. However, when they felt that many young geniuses were looking at this farmer with disdain, the older generation experts quickly spoke out. Don't be presumptuous. This is the realm master of the 6th realm, Lord Zuoting. What a joke! How dare he look down on a realm master? He was simply courting death by hanging himself. Although Zuoting was the most ordinary-looking among the 8 realm masters of the Hachibara Senkai, his level of danger was recognized by everyone as one of the top 3 existences among the Hachibara Senkai's 8 realm masters. Although the 8 realms of the Hachibara Senkai did not have much of a difference in strength, and the 8 realm masters were equally matched in strength, there was always a difference between the strong and the weak. It was just that the difference was not big, and it could even be said that there was only a slight difference. Therefore, in terms of strength, it was hard to say who was the strongest among the 8 realm masters. However, there was a ranking for the level of danger. Zuoting might not be the most dangerous among the 8 realm masters, but he was definitely one of the top 3 existences. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1700. A farmer was actually one of the 8 sector lords of the Hachibara Senkai. Indeed, one could not judge a book by its cover. Upon hearing the older generation experts' words, many of the young geniuses retracted their gazes. After the introduction of Zuoting, everyone's gaze quickly fell on Luoli and Honglian. At the same time, the older generation expert continued his introduction. Do you see those 2? They are the 7th sector lord, Lord Luoli, and the 8th sector lord, Lord Honglian. Lord Luoli is the most mysterious of the 8 Hachibara Senkai sector lords because he rarely takes action. As for Lord Honglian, she is the only female sector lord in the Hachibara Senkai. Following the older generation expert's introduction, everyone's gaze fell on Luoli and Honglian. They did not have much interest in Luoli, but when they looked at Honglian, all the male geniuses were infatuated with her. Beautiful, she was simply too beautiful. Honglian's beauty was different from that of ordinary young girls. Compared to young girls, Honglian had a more mature charm, just like a ripe apple. Many of the male skyprides couldn't resist such temptation. However, at this moment, the experts of the older generation reminded them once again. Do you all have a death wish? How dare you covet the sector lord? After being reprimanded by the older generation expert, many of the male geniuses forcefully suppressed their impulses. Luoli, who was hovering in the sky, obviously noticed this scene as well. He said helplessly to Honglian, who was beside him, "Can't you restrain yourself a little? There are so many people here." Luoli obviously meant that Honglian should not deliberately tease these little guys. Didn't she see that many of them had already lost their minds? However, when Honglian heard Luoli's words, she smiled nonchalantly and said, "I'm just playing. These little guys are really interesting." Her smile was so charming that the male geniuses below were stunned once again. However, at this moment, Zuoting came in front of Luoli and Honglian and said, "Brother Luoli, Honglian, we haven't seen each other for 1,000 years, right?" "More or less." Luoli nodded indifferently. Apart from the first sector lord, the other 7 sector lords of the Hachibara Senkai had already gathered together. Looking at the 7 sector lords in the sky, the crowd below unconsciously took a deep breath. This was definitely the most magnificent event in the history of the 8 Desolation world. 7 immortal emperors had gathered together. Such a scene was not something that even the experts of the older generation had seen before, let alone the young geniuses. However, the gathering of the Hachibara Senkai was only the beginning of the shock. After the 7 sector lords appeared, the young geniuses from the 2nd and 4th realms quickly stirred up a commotion. Under the crowd's gaze, 2 young figures appeared on the scene. When the young geniuses looked at the 2 of them, they could not help but reveal a fanatical look of worship. These 2 were none other than the heirs of the 2nd and 4th realms, Guanhong and Quanfeng. The young man in a cyan robe was Guanhong, the heir of the 2nd realm. The one in a purple robe was Quanfeng, the heir of the 4th realm. The sector lords had already separated themselves. After greeting each other, they did not care about anything else and directly entered the main hall. As sector lords, they naturally had their subordinates to arrange the following matters. There was no need for them to worry. With the departure of the sector lords, needless to say, the ones who would appear next were the heirs of the various realms. In the Hachibara Senkai, the most eye-catching people were the sector lords of the various realms. However, after the sector lords, it was the heirs of the various realms. This was because they were the future of their realms and the hope of their realms. At the same time, they were also the only existences in their realms other than the sector lords who had formed the heavenly immortal mansion. If there were no accidents, the heirs of the various realms would definitely become figures at the level of the sector lords in the future and inherit the mantle of the sector lords. The heirs' level of attention could be said to be no less than that of the sector lords. In fact, they were even more eye-catching. After all, everyone was already familiar with the sector lords. However, they did not know much about the heirs of the various realms. They were very mysterious. As the heirs of the 2nd and 4th realms, Guanhong and Quanfeng personally came out to greet the heirs of the various realms. This was indeed very appropriate. After Guanhong and Quanfeng appeared, from the previous palace and starship, figures also rose into the air. First, from the silver-white palace of the 3rd realm, a youth in a black robe rose into the air. This youth was Fu Rui, the heir of the 3rd realm. Seeing Fu Rui, Guanhong took the initiative to smile and say, "Brother Fu Rui, long time no see." Hearing this, Fu Rui moved and came before Guanhong and Quanfeng. He also smiled and said, "Brother Guanhong, Brother Quanfeng." Fu Rui was the first to appear, followed by the 2nd heir. This was a young girl in a short white skirt. She looked extremely cold and unapproachable. This young girl was the heir of the 5th realm and the only female heir of the Hachibara Senkai. Her name was Qiu-Ru. After Qiu-Ru appeared, the heir of the 7th realm, Lu Xiao, also appeared. Like the sector lord of the 7th realm, Lu Xiao was also an ordinary-looking person. He wore a gray robe and was a typical person who would not be looked at if he was thrown into a crowd. The heirs of the other realms had already appeared. Everyone present had a certain understanding of them. At least, everyone knew the name of each of them. Now, only the heirs of the 7th and 8th realms were left. They were Xiaochen and Yi Xiao. Guanhong and the other 4 stood together and looked in the direction of the Black Palace of the 7th realm. They were familiar with Yi Xiao. At least, they knew him. However, they had no contact with Xiaochen. He did not appear. At the same time, Quanfeng said indifferently, "I heard that the heir of the 7th realm has changed. It's no longer Yu Shujin." Hearing this, Fu Rui nodded slightly and said, "Yes, I heard that too. It's said that he used to be the first saint of the 7th wilderness." There were some rumors about Xiaochen in the Hachibara Senkai, but not many. Thus, Fu Rui and the other 4 did not know much about him. However, perhaps because Xiaochen had not been trained by the Hachibara Senkai, Xiaochen had not been trained by the Hachibara Senkai since he was young. Thus, one could still hear the contempt in Quanfeng and Fu Rui's words. On the other hand, Qiu and Lu Xiao were still indifferent, as if this had nothing to do with them. Please add, vote, recommend. Chapter 1701. Qiu and Lu Xiao were like that, so they didn't pay much attention to Xiaochen. Besides, Xiaochen was the heir of the seventh realm, so they didn't have a close relationship with him. If it weren't for the battle in the second wilderness, they probably wouldn't have met him so soon. On the other hand, Quan Feng and Fu Rui seemed to look down on Xiaochen, but that had nothing to do with them. All eyes fell on the Black Palace of the seventh realm. Under everyone's gaze, Xiaochen and Yi Xiao finally appeared in front of everyone. Xiaochen was still wearing a white robe. Coupled with his white hair and blood-red eyes, he looked quite handsome. At the very least, he could be considered a good-looking guy. They all looked at Xiaochen. Previously, many people had been talking about how the heir of the seventh realm had just been appointed. Yu Shujin was no longer the heir of the seventh realm. Many people were unfamiliar with Xiaochen, and because of that, they were naturally curious. Now that Xiaochen had appeared, many people looked at Xiaochen curiously. He gave off a devilish feeling, and it was this feeling that made many female geniuses blush. Clearly, they were attracted by Xiaochen's appearance. Feeling the gazes around him, Yi Xiao and Xiaochen descended from the Black Palace in the seventh realm and smiled wickedly. TSK, I didn't know that brother Xiaochen was so popular. Hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiaochen ignored him. At the same time, Quan Feng and Fu Rui also took the initiative to step forward. However, they ignored Xiaochen and looked at Yi Xiao. Yi Xiao, your mouth is still so cheap. No matter how despicable I am, how could I be more despicable than you? Yi Xiao replied without backing down. It could be said that they completely ignored Xiaochen. They didn't even look at Xiaochen. From Quan Feng and Fu Rui's expressions, it wasn't hard to see that they didn't like Xiaochen. They were all Hachibara Senkai's heirs, so they had the same status. In front of Xiaochen, Fu Rui and Quan Feng had nothing to be proud of. However, because Xiaochen had become an heir of the Hachibara Senkai, they didn't like Xiaochen at all. Xiaochen didn't care about Quan Feng and Fu Rui's disdain. He didn't plan to get to know them anyway. Xiaochen didn't change his expression. At the same time, the heir of the second realm's heir of the Hachibara realm took the initiative to come before Xiaochen. The heir of the second realm. Guanhong didn't look down on Xiaochen at all because he had just become the heir of the Hachibara realm. Seeing this, Xiaochen said indifferently, Xiaochen. These two simple words were his answer to Xiaochen. Guanhong took the initiative to greet him, Quan Feng and Fu Rui looked down on him, and Qiu and Lu Xiao ignored him. The heirs had all greeted each other. When all the heirs gathered, Luoli and the other realm lords were chatting in the main hall. As the host, the realm lord of the second realm, Yi Xian, naturally had to be a good host. He immediately announced that there would be a banquet tonight. The others didn't refuse. After settling on the banquet, the realm lords started chatting. After all, they hadn't seen each other for many years. Naturally, there were many things to talk about. As they chatted, they unknowingly talked about the heirs. At this moment, Yi Xian looked at Luoli and said without thinking. Luoli, I heard that the heir of the seventh realm has changed. Hearing this, Luoli didn't care and replied indifferently, yes, Yu Shujin is a bit weak. She's not suitable to continue sitting on the heir seat. Hearing this, Yi Xian smiled and said, I heard that you, the new heir of the seventh realm, were the first holy son of the seventh wasteland. However, you have to be careful. The other little fellows are all arrogant and will inevitably look down on him. Tell him to endure and not suffer for nothing. Yi Xian knew the temper of these little guys. They weren't arrogant, but there weren't many people in this world who could catch their eyes. Of course, they had the ability to do so. It was originally a kind reminder to prevent Xiaochen from suffering at their hands. However, when it came out of Yi Xian's mouth, it didn't feel good no matter how he heard it. It was also Luoli who didn't care about Yi Xian's words in the slightest. Hearing this, Luoli wasn't angry. He couldn't help but think of Xiaochen's personality. He couldn't help but smile as he thought to himself. Suffer a loss? With that kid's personality, it's hard to say who will suffer. Luoli thought this in his heart, but on the surface, he said indifferently. If he suffers a loss, then so be it. If he doesn't suffer a loss, how can he grow? That's true. As long as we don't cause any trouble, we can let these little guys play by themselves. Hearing this, Ningsu also smiled and replied. All the realm lords thought that Xiaochen might suffer a little this time. After all, Xiaochen had just joined the Hachibara Senkai and had not completely integrated into it. However, only Luoli and Red Lotus knew who would suffer in the end. While everyone was chatting in the main hall, in the main square outside, after greeting Guanhong, Xiaochen could not be bothered to talk nonsense with the others. He immediately stepped forward and prepared to leave. As for the supper, since Guanhong wanted to chat here, then so be it. Without saying a word, he prepared to leave. However, at this moment, an extremely untimely voice sounded out. What, as a newcomer, you don't even know how to greet everyone? You really think you're some big shot? His voice was filled with ridicule. Looking closely, these words really came from Fu Rui's mouth. Moreover, as he spoke, Fu Rui had already flashed and blocked Xiaochen's path. Obviously, he wanted to put Xiaochen in his place. Seeing such a scene, the people around them were also interested in the show. This was a battle between the heirs of Kunlun's field. They just didn't know who would win in the end. However, in everyone's opinion, Xiaochen would most likely bow down. After all, Xiaochen was the most junior among all the heirs of Kunlun's field. At the same time, he was also the one with the weakest foundation in the Hachibara Senkai. Based on this, Xiaochen would most likely settle the matter peacefully. Many people thought that Xiaochen would compromise. Unfortunately, they didn't understand Xiaochen's personality at all. The scene they were hoping for did not happen. Hearing Fu Rui's words, Xiaochen looked at him indifferently. At the same time, Fu Rui also looked at Xiaochen with a cold smile. He laughed inwardly. Someone who just joined the Hachibara Senkai thinks he's on equal footing with us? He wanted to make things difficult for Xiaochen. However, just as Fu Rui was laughing inwardly, the corners of Yi Zhao's mouth twitched involuntarily. Sensing Yi Zhao's actions, Quan Feng, who was beside him, asked curiously, Yi Zhao, what's wrong with you? Hearing Quan Feng's words, Yi Zhao said, oh no. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1702. Yi Zhao knew Xiaochen's character very well, so when he saw Fu Rui blocking Xiaochen's way, he knew that he was in trouble. However, Quan Feng obviously didn't know Xiaochen well, so when he heard Yi Zhao's words, he thought that Quan Feng was worried about Xiaochen. Therefore, he chuckled and said, Yi Zhao, don't worry. Fu Rui knows what he's doing. Don't worry? Yi Zhao was amused by Quan Feng's words. He really wanted to tell Quan Feng that he wasn't worried about Xiaochen at all. He was worried about Fu Rui. However, before Yi Zhao could say anything, Xiaochen said indifferently, scram. From the beginning to the end, Xiaochen could naturally tell that Fu Rui and Quan Feng were looking down on him. Xiaochen didn't want to argue with them at all, and he didn't have the slightest interest in getting to know them. However, Fu Rui didn't know what was good for him. Xiaochen was already prepared to leave, so everyone would be safe and sound, but this guy just had to block Xiaochen's way. Wasn't he just looking for trouble? He thought that Xiaochen would take the initiative to lower his head, or at least give Fu Rui some face. Who would have thought that Xiaochen would directly tell Fu Rui to scram, not giving Fu Rui any face at all? Fu Rui was obviously stunned when he heard Xiaochen's words. He didn't expect Xiaochen to be so arrogant. But soon, Fu Rui's face darkened. He looked coldly at Xiaochen and said, what did you say? You. Fu Rui was infuriated when he heard Xiaochen tell him to get lost. However, before he could even finish his sentence, a blood-red sword aura was already heading straight for him. Holding the dustless sword, Xiaochen directly slashed out. Moreover, Xiaochen didn't hold back at all. He directly used the Netherworld Sword technique. It was a second-grade immortal skill, the Netherworld Sword technique. Fu Rui's words came to an abrupt halt when he saw Xiaochen's sudden attack. As an heir of Kunlun's field, Fu Rui was no fool. He could feel that Xiaochen had not held back at all. Even he would not dare to be careless in the face of such a strike. Fu Rui didn't expect that Xiaochen would slash out without saying a word. Moreover, he used a second-grade immortal skill. At this moment, Fu Rui felt like he was being cursed. However, even though Fu Rui was depressed, he still made a move to block the attack. Without any hesitation, he also used a second-grade celestial skill. Fu Rui struck out with his palm. The sword and the palm collided violently. Immediately, a terrifying shockwave spread in all directions. Both Xiaochen and Fu Rui were pushed back several steps by the shockwave. Fu Rui was also an heir. His cultivation had also reached the great success of the immortal realm, and he had also condensed a celestial immortal mansion. Neither of them had the upper hand in the head-on collision. However, just when Fu Rui thought that the matter was over after he blocked Xiaochen's attack, Xiaochen raised his sword and attacked again before he could say anything. F***CKU. Fu Rui couldn't help but curse when he saw Xiaochen attacking again. This was the main square of the Second World Palace. What was Xiaochen trying to do? Was he going to have a big fight with him here? Xiaochen felt depressed. However, Fu Rui didn't have much time to think. He appeared in front of Fu Rui in a flash. At the same time, a terrifying attack poured down like a flood. Xiaochen didn't have any concerns at all. Moreover, facing Fu Rui, he used all his combat strength. He used the tempered battle body, the sword realm, and the 5 elemental laws surged out. It was obvious that he wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. In the face of Xiaochen's attack, Fu Rui could only block it. However, he felt extremely sullen. To be honest, Fu Rui didn't mean to fight to the death with Xiaochen. He just wanted to show Xiaochen his power. Moreover, after a short fight with Xiaochen, Fu Rui knew that Xiaochen's strength wasn't any weaker than his. It was hard to say who would win if they fought. Indeed, Fu Rui did not have much confidence in defeating Xiaochen. Furthermore, there was no reason for the two of them to fight at all. However, Xiaochen didn't seem to care about this at all. He didn't give Fu Rui any chance to escape. He stuck close to Fu Rui and attacked him fiercely. Fu Rui was frustrated. He just wanted to mock Xiaochen a little. Who would have thought that things would end up like this? Fu Rui wanted to curse at Xiaochen for it. Fu Rui was not the only one who was puzzled. Many of the young geniuses and experts from the 8-Baron immortal world were also puzzled. What was going on? Why did he attack just like that? And from the looks of it, he didn't hold back at all. Fu Rui was already injured. Yes, Fu Rui was indeed injured. However, it wasn't serious. Previously, when Xiaochen attacked, Fu Rui was careless and his arm was injured by Xiaochen. People from other realms didn't know Xiaochen's character. However, people from the 7th realm and 8th realm knew Xiaochen's character very well. At this moment, in the Black Palace, the geniuses from the 7th realm shook their heads helplessly as they watched Xiaochen fight fiercely with Fu Rui. They thought to themselves, Fu Rui, you really don't know what's good for you. Why did you have to provoke our heir of Kunlun? Everyone from the 7th realm mourned for Fu Rui. If the realm lords didn't show up today, Fu Rui would probably suffer a great loss. The more they fought, the more aggrieved Fu Rui became. In the end, Fu Rui couldn't help but yell, Xiaochen, are you crazy? In Fu Rui's opinion, Xiaochen was just mocking him. Why did he have to fight so hard? However, in response to Fu Rui's yell, Xiaochen kept slashing with his sharp sword. No matter what Fu Rui said, Xiaochen seemed to only want to kill him. That's right, kill him. Fu Rui thought to himself, what the F***ck Xiaochen didn't seem to want to respond to him at all. Does this guy really want to kill me here? Crazy. He must be crazy. He only mocked me a little and Xiao Chen actually wanted to kill me. What the F***ck is he? Fu Rui couldn't retreat, but he didn't want to risk his life with Xiao Chen at all. After all, Xiao Chen wasn't weak. If they really risked their lives, it was hard to tell who would win. Moreover, there was no reason for them to risk their lives. Watching the fierce battle between Xiao Chen and Fu Rui, Quan Feng, who had a faint smile on his face earlier, had a slight change in his expression. He did not expect Xiao Chen to attack without any hesitation. Moreover, he did not show any mercy. Seeing that Quan Feng's expression had changed slightly, Yi Xiao said helplessly, "I already told you that you were in trouble. You could have provoked anyone, but you had to provoke Crazy Xiao. Please add, vote, recommend." Chapter 1703. Hearing Yi Xiao's words, Quan Feng finally realized that Yi Xiao wasn't worried about Xiao Chen. No one had expected things to develop to this point. Looking at the sullen Fu Rui, the people present did not know what to say. Especially when they saw Xiao Chen's look of not giving up until he was dead, everyone was even more afraid. Not long ago, many people thought that Xiao Chen was the weakest of the Hachibara Senkai's heirs. But now, this thought had completely disappeared. Not only did no one dare to look down on Xiao Chen, but many people had even labeled Xiao Chen as someone not to be trifled with. This person was definitely not to be trifled with. In terms of danger level, Xiao Chen was definitely the most dangerous of all the heirs. Even Fu Rui was put in a difficult position by Xiao Chen. If it had been anyone else who wasn't as strong as Fu Rui, they would have been killed by Xiao Chen long ago. The danger level of Xiao Chen in everyone's hearts rose sharply. At the same time, Guan Hong, Qiu Ru, and Lu Zhao's expressions changed as they looked at Xiao Chen. Although the three of them hadn't mocked Xiao Chen before, to be honest, they didn't care too much about Xiao Chen. But now, Guan Hong and the other two had to admit that the contempt they had for Xiao Chen had disappeared. They truly regarded Xiao Chen as someone on the same level as them. It wasn't just because of Xiao Chen's personality, but also because of Xiao Chen's strength. Fu Rui couldn't do anything to Xiao Chen, could he? It could be said that Xiao Chen's strength had truly reached the level of an heir. He wasn't any weaker than them. The more he fought, the more sullen he felt. Fu Rui was already regretting it. Why did he provoke this crazy Xiao Chen for no reason? At this time, the sector lords in the main hall naturally noticed what was happening outside. Ning Su, the sector lord of the third realm, where Fu Rui was, looked at Luoli and smiled faintly. "Luoli, the heir of the seventh realm, you're quite interesting. It's just that his personality is a bit extreme. He still needs to be taught in the future," Luoli replied faintly. Luoli said that he would slowly learn how to be taught in the future. But looking at Luoli, he didn't seem to mean that at all. It was just empty words. Even the sector lords present didn't think that Xiao Chen would be so irritable. He would draw his sword and kill without a word. No wonder Luoli wasn't worried at all when he talked about Xiao Chen. Seeing that Xiao Chen and Fu Rui's battle was getting more and more intense, Fu Rui was also really angry. He looked like he wanted to fight Xiao Chen to the death. Of course, Xiao Chen wasn't afraid of this at all. The two heirs fought in the main square without holding back at all. As soon as Luoli finished speaking, the sector lord of the fourth realm, Qing Yun, who was the host, said in a low voice, "It's about time. If they continue fighting, Old Ye's palace will be torn apart by these two little guys. Don't worry. My palace isn't made of paper. These two little guys can't tear it apart," Yi Xian said faintly. He wasn't worried at all that his palace would be torn apart by Xiao Chen and Yi Xian. Qing Yun replied unhappily, "Then we'll let them continue fighting? Then we'll fight to the death?" Hearing Qing Yun's words, Ning Su smiled and said, "It's about time." Naturally, he couldn't let Xiao Chen and Fu Rui fight to the death. As soon as he finished speaking, Ning Su waved his hand and a huge force spread out from the main hall, forcefully separating Xiao Chen and Fu Rui who were fighting fiercely. Xiao Chen and Fu Rui naturally couldn't resist Ning Su's attack. However, being separated at this time, Fu Rui was clearly angry. The depression before wasn't because he was afraid of Xiaochen, but because Fu Rui couldn't find a reason to fight to the death with Xiaochen. However, Xiaochen didn't give up, so Fu Rui naturally became angry. After being separated by Ning Su, Fu Rui looked at Xiaochen and shouted coldly. "Come again. Do you really think I'm afraid of you?" After all, Fu Rui was an heir of Kunlun realm. However, before Xiaochen could reply, Ning Su's voice rang out from the main palace. "That's enough. You two little guys. I can understand that you're young and aggressive, but there's no need to fight to the death." Ning Su spoke. Fu Rui's eyes flashed with anger. "Realm Lord, Xiaochen is too much." Fu Rui felt very wronged, and it was hard for him to swallow his anger. However, as soon as he said that, Xiaochen finally spoke up, and it was Xiaochen's words that made Fu Rui lose his temper. Xiaochen looked in the direction of the main hall and said calmly. With the support of spiritual power, his voice was clearly heard by everyone present. "Realm Lord, I request a fight to the death with Fu Rui." Fight to the death? Fu Rui, who was originally angry, was stunned at first, then he clenched his fists. His gaze was as if he wanted to swallow Xiaochen alive. What kind of person was this? He was angry, but all he did was say a few words to vent his anger. "And you want to fight to the death? And you want to fight to the death? Did I F** King kill your dog or steal your rice? What kind of grudge do you have?" Xiaochen directly requested to fight to the death. Hearing this, everyone present was stunned. Yi Xiao was the first to react. He came to Xiaochen's side and smiled helplessly. "Brother Xiaochen, forget it. We're all from the same sect." He knew Xiaochen's personality well. However, when he heard Yi Xiao's words, Xiaochen said calmly, "Doesn't he want to fight? I'll fight to the death with him." "You?" Hearing Xiaochen's words, Fu Rui was furious. But before he could say anything, Quan Feng came to his side and gently tugged at Fu Rui's sleeve, whispering to him. "Forget it." Quan Feng could see that the more you confronted Xiaochen, the more unyielding he became. He had already given up on the idea of teaching Xiaochen a lesson. Hearing Quan Feng's words, Fu Rui was still angry, but he still shut his mouth. However, when he looked at Xiaochen, he snorted coldly. Two heirs requested to fight to the death. As soon as Xiaochen said this, Luo Li's voice came from the main hall. He said two simple words. "Not allowed." Naturally, he wouldn't agree to Xiaochen and Fu Rui's fight to the death. Hearing this, under Yi Xiao's constant persuasion, Xiaochen didn't say anything else. He glanced at Fu Rui coolly, then stepped forward and returned to the Seventh Realm's Black Palace. Seeing Xiaochen's back, Fu Rui's eyes were filled with anger, helplessness, and fear. He had wanted to teach Xiaochen a lesson today, but who would have thought that he would end up in such a sorry state? Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.